My son brought his fiancée home to meet the family. My wife glanced at the girl's cheap clothes, let out a cold laugh, and said in front of everyone, "This family isn't a place for some small-town girl looking for a rich life." I stayed quiet and looked away. But then my son grabbed her hand and proudly introduced her full name and college major. I froze. The wine glass slipped out of my hand and shattered. It was a last name I hadn't heard since 1999. And she was actually... This story isn't easy, but I believe it's worth hearing. Before we begin, drop a quick comment for me. What are you doing right now while you listen? Driving, working, or maybe winding down for the evening? I truly appreciate you being here. Just a quick note, some details have been adjusted for storytelling and reflection. What matters most is the message it carries. I heard my son say, "I love her," through the half-open study door, and the inheritance file lay open on my desk, showing a surname that could destroy everything. At 55, I had spent 3 decades perfecting the art of appearing defeated, while holding final signature authority over 2 subsidiaries worth $180 million. My mother, Constance Prescott, 80 years old, and still commanding Prescott Holdings from her Westchester estate, believed she controlled the empire. I let her believe it. Control was her currency. Mine was information. That Thursday night, November 28th. I was working late in the library reviewing quarterly reports when I heard Everett's voice drift through the door, connecting to the adjacent study. My son, 20 years old, stood somewhere in that room, with his phone pressed to his ear, speaking with an unfamiliar tenderness that made me pause mid-calculation. "I love her," he said quietly. "Mom would never understand, but I don't care anymore." I set down my pen. Everett had never mentioned anyone seriously. He dated occasionally the sort of carefully vetted young women Vivica, my wife, introduced at charity galas. But this voice, this had weight. "Tamara's different," he continued. "She doesn't care about the money. When I told her about the trust fund, she actually got uncomfortable. Can you believe that? Ein bond ondigdas bestarend." I felt paternal concern shift into something sharper. A girl he'd never mentioned. A girl who knew about the family money. A girl he was planning to introduce to someone's family soon, based on the careful way he was navigating the conversation. "I'm meeting her mother next week," Everett said. "I know it's fast, but when you know, right?" I heard him laugh, the sound of a young man convinced he'd found something rare. Then footsteps. He was moving toward the door. I pretended to study the spreadsheet as he passed the library entrance. Phone still at his ear, completely unaware I'd overheard anything. The front door closed a few minutes later. Everett was gone, probably heading back to his Columbia apartment. I sat in the leather chair my grandfather had commissioned in 1952 and tried to process what I'd heard. My son was in love. That should have made me happy. But something felt wrong. I walked into the study drawn by instinct I couldn't name. The inheritance selection file lay open on the desk, the annual review where family members updated beneficiary information and trust allocations. Everett must have been reviewing his paperwork before I arrived. In the margin of the 3rd page in his neat handwriting was a note, "Tamara Upshaw, Columbia Art History." The room tilted. Upshaw. That surname hit me like physical force, a name I hadn't allowed myself to think about in 25 years. My hand gripped the edge of the desk as memory flooded back with visceral clarity. Noreen Upshaw, 1999. I was 30 years old, already married to Vivica in the arrangement my mother had orchestrated, already trapped in the golden cage of Prescott expectations. Noreen worked as a curator's assistant at a small gallery in Queens. We met at an art acquisition event. She had no idea who I was, treated me like a person instead of a portfolio. And for 6 months, I lived a double life I knew couldn't last. My mother found out. She always found out. In April 1999, Constance sat me down in this very library and explained that Noreen Upshaw had accepted a very generous settlement to disappear. $200,000, a clean break. My mother showed me bank records, a signed agreement proof that the girl from Queens had taken the money and vanished. I never heard from Noreen again. My mother said she'd moved to California. I forced myself to believe it. I forced myself to forget. But I'd never forgotten the name. How many Upshaws could there be in New York with a daughter at Columbia the exact same age as my son? I stared at Everett's handwriting. Tamara Upshaw, Columbia Art History. The words blurred as my mind raced through possibilities I didn't want to consider. Upshaw wasn't a common surname. It wasn't impossible that this was a coincidence that some unrelated family shared the name that my son had simply fallen for a girl with no connection to my past. But the coincidences were stacking too high. Columbia. Art. The same university where I had endowed a scholarship in. No, I stopped that thought. I'd endowed that scholarship anonymously, a guilt offering I'd made years ago, to a field Noreen had loved. There was no way to trace it back to me. No way for her to know. Unless she'd always known. I pulled out my phone and opened a search browser, hands shaking slightly as I typed, Tamara Upshaw, Columbia. Student directory privacy settings blocked most results. But a university art show catalog from last spring appeared. I clicked through. There. A photograph of a young woman standing beside a mixed media installation. Dark hair, Noreen's cheekbones. 20 years old according to the caption. I did the math I'd been avoiding. Noreen disappeared in April 1999. If she'd been pregnant when my mother paid her off, if she'd carried that pregnancy to term. The child would have been born in late 1999, or early 2000, 24 or 25 years ago. The catalog said Tamara was 20, born in early 2004. The timeline was close, too close. The numbers didn't lie. 1999, 25 years, 20 years old. The math was simple, and it was destroying me. I set the phone down and tried to breathe. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe this girl was Noreen's niece or a cousin or completely unrelated. Maybe the age discrepancy meant I was inventing connections that didn't exist. But my son's voice echoed in my memory. I love her? And if I was right, if Noreen had been pregnant when she vanished, if my mother had paid off a woman carrying my child, if that child was now 20 years old and attending Columbia and dating my son, then Everett was in love with his own half-sister. And neither of them knew. I stood in that library with my hand gripping the edge of the mahogany desk, staring at a name I hadn't allowed myself to think about in decades. My son was in love. And if I was right about who this girl really was, that love would ruin both of them before they ever understood why. I needed to know if the past I'd buried had come back to destroy my children. The family safe opened with the same 6-digit code my mother had used for 40 years, and inside buried beneath trust documents and stock certificates. I found the photograph she should have destroyed. I'd waited until dawn, tracking Constance's routine, with the precision I'd learned from years of surviving under her control. She took breakfast in the south parlor every morning at 6:30, a ritual as fixed as her conviction that the Prescott bloodline answered to her alone. That gave me 40 minutes in the East Wing study, before she'd notice my absence from my own breakfast table. The safe sat behind a portrait of my grandfather, the founder who'd built this empire in the 1940s, and died before he could see what his daughter would become. I swung the painting aside and entered the code 041952. April 19th, 1952. The day Prescott Holdings Incorporated. The door clicked open. Inside, everything was organized with my mother's obsessive precision. Trust documents in manila folders, stock certificates in acid-free sleeves, property deeds arranged chronologically. I pushed past the surface layer, searching for anything from 1999, anything with Noreen's name, anything that would confirm or deny the nightmare taking shape in my mind. My hands found a slim envelope tucked beneath a folder marked Closed Acquisitions 1995 to 2000. No label, no filing notation. Just a manila envelope that didn't belong in a safe full of legal instruments. I opened it. A single photograph slipped into my palm, 4 by 6 inches, slightly faded, dated April 9th, 1999, on the back in handwriting I didn't recognize. The image showed 2 people standing at the Hudson River, overlooking Cold Spring. I recognized myself immediately 30 years old, wearing the navy jacket I'd donated to charity a decade ago. My arm around a young woman in a blue sundress. The background was sharp River Mountain spring foliage, but the woman's face had been deliberately torn away. A ragged oval of absence where her features should have been. I remembered that dress. I remembered that afternoon. I remembered Noreen laughing as the wind caught her hair. Remembered thinking I would give up everything if it meant I could keep her. 2 weeks later, my mother told me Noreen had taken the money and disappeared. But she'd kept this photograph. Kept it for 25 years. Kept it hidden, but not destroyed. Filed under acquisitions like Noreen was just another asset to be managed and controlled. The face was torn away, but the dress remained. The river remained. The proof remained. "You're in my safe," a voice said from the doorway. "That's bold even for you." I turned. Constance Prescott stood in the threshold with her arms crossed, 80 years old, but still carrying herself like a general surveying occupied territory. Her spine was rigid despite decades of wielding power through whispered threats and strategic cruelties. She wore her mourning pearls in a dove-gray suit that probably cost more than most people earned in a month. Her eyes sharp cold, calculating fixed on the photograph in my hand. She didn't look surprised. She looked prepared. "Who tore this photograph, Mother?" I asked, keeping my voice level. She stepped into the study and closed the door behind her. "Ancient history isn't your concern. Your son's future is. Answer the question." "I did what was necessary." She crossed to the desk and sat in the leather chair like she owned every molecule of air in the room. She did technically. The estate, the holdings, the empire, all still in her name until the trust transferred on her death. That girl was entirely unsuitable. I removed her. You moved on. We don't revisit closed chapters. You paid her off. I solved a problem. Constance's tone was clinical, discussing a business transaction. $200,000, she signed a separation agreement and left New York. You had a wife, a future. Responsibilities. I protected the family. How long had she been waiting for me to come looking for this photo? I held up the torn photograph. Why keep evidence of what you did? For the first time, something flickered in her expression. Not guilt, calculation. Insurance, she said simply. People forget arrangements. Documentation prevents misunderstandings. What misunderstandings? She ignored the question. Everett will marry by spring. I've prepared a list of suitable families. The pivot was so abrupt, it took me a moment to process. What? Your son? She said, enunciating each word like I was slow to comprehend. He's 20 years old. It's time to secure appropriate connections. The Ashford family has a daughter graduating from Princeton. The Sutherlands have twins, both acceptable. I'll arrange introductions. He's 20 years old, I repeated. He has time. Time is exactly what we don't have. Constance stood and walked to the window, her back to me. Some mistakes repeat themselves unless we act. Your son has been seen with an entirely unsuitable girl. Art student, no family connections, no assets. I won't allow history to repeat. My chest went cold. What do you know about Everett's personal life? I know everything about this family. She turned and her expression was granite. He's dating someone named Tamara. It ends now. You will speak to him. You will explain that his future requires better choices. And he will marry someone from the approved list by June. 6 months. She was demanding my son marry a stranger in 6 months. And if he refuses, he won't refuse. Constance walked past me toward the door. Because you'll convince him. You know what happens when Prescott men make romantic decisions without family approval. You lived it. You won't let your son repeat your mistakes. She said some mistakes repeat themselves, and I understood she knew about Tamara all along. She paused at the threshold. The photograph stays in the safe. Ancient history should remain buried. For everyone's sake, she left. The door clicked shut. I stood in the East Wing study holding proof that my mother had destroyed my relationship with Noreen 25 years ago. And now I understood the deeper truth. Constance wasn't just controlling, she was terrified. She knew Noreen had been pregnant. She knew there was another child. And now she was racing to bury that secret before Everett discovered he was in love with his own sister. My mother stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, already planning my son's wedding to a stranger. And I realized with cold certainty I had to find Noreen before Constance found them both. I drove north on Route 9 alone, without telling anyone where I was going, because the truth I was hunting could destroy my family before I ever understood how to protect it. The morning after finding that torn photograph, I'd spent 3 hours tracing Noreen through old museum employment records. She'd worked as an archivist specializing in Hudson Valley historical collections. By noon, I'd found an estate sale consultant in Cold Spring, operating under the name N. Caldwell, 20 years of experience in historical appraisal. The professional photo showed a woman in her 40s with dark hair pulled back, wearing reading glasses and a neutral expression designed to deflect attention. But I recognized the angle of her jaw, the way she held herself at a distance from the camera. Noreen had been 50 miles north for 2 decades, living in plain sight, under a name that wouldn't trigger any search my mother might run. I took an unmarked sedan, told my assistant I was visiting a property upstate, and drove. The Hudson River paralleled my route, gray and cold. I passed through small towns where family meant something different than shareholder value and inheritance structures. Cold Spring appeared as predicted, a main street of antique shops and cafes, historic architecture preserved for tourists. I parked 3 blocks from Caldwell Estate Services and walked. The office occupied a converted Victorian sharing space with an art gallery. Through the window, I could see shelves of cataloged items, the organized chaos of someone who sorted through other people's histories for a living. I went to the cafe 2 doors down and took a corner booth where I could watch the street. If Noreen was still the person I remembered, she'd take a late lunch around 2 o'clock. At 2:15, she emerged carrying a leather bag and a worn paperback. Noreen Upshaw, 44 years old, moved through the world with practiced invisibility, the careful anonymity of someone who had spent 25 years making sure no one looked too closely. She wore jeans and a dark sweater, her hair shorter than I remembered threading with gray. She looked like a small-town professional, unremarkable, and intentionally so. She pushed through the cafe door and stopped when she saw me. Fear flashed across her face, instant recognition, followed by the calculation of whether she could run, but she was 44, not 19. And survival instincts told her running would only confirm what I already knew. She crossed to my booth and sat without invitation. "Did you have my child, Noreen?" I asked. She set her bag down slowly. "You have no right to ask me that after 25 years of silence. I didn't know you were pregnant. My mother told me you took the settlement and left. Your mother paid me to disappear, $200,000 and a legal agreement that if I ever contacted you again, she would destroy me and take the child. I was 22, pregnant. With no family and a woman with unlimited resources threatening me. What would you have done? 25 years of silence sat between us, like a third person heavier than any truth we could speak. I would have fought for you," I said. "You were already married. You had responsibilities." Noreen pulled off her reading glasses. Without them, I could see the woman I'd known. "Why are you here now?" "My son is dating a girl named Tamara Upshaw." The color drained from her face. "Yes," she whispered. "I had your daughter. Your mother made sure you'd never knew. I raised Tamara alone, moved 6 times. In 5 years, changed my professional name. Built a life where Constance Prescott would never find us. And she has no idea who her father is because telling her would put her at risk. She's at Columbia. Full scholarship, art history. She earned it herself." Noreen's hands were shaking. "She's brilliant and kind and nothing like your family." "She's dating my son," I said. "They're in love, and they're half-siblings." Noreen closed her eyes. "No, how would they even... At same age, same campus, no idea they share DNA." I leaned forward. "My mother found out. She's demanding Everett marry someone else within 6 months. She knows Noreen. She's always known about Tamara." The cafe door opened. A young woman walked in dark hair and a ponytail wearing a Columbia sweatshirt and carrying an overstuffed backpack. She headed straight for our booth. "Mom, I thought you were working until 3. She stopped seeing me. "Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt." Tamara Upshaw, 20 years old, stood 3 feet away with art history texts visible through her bag's open zipper, completely unaware that she was looking at her biological father for the first time. She had my bone structure, the high cheekbones that ran through every Prescott for 3 generations, the same green-gray eyes that looked back at me from Everett's face every morning, the distinctive arch of eyebrows that appeared in family portraits dating back to my grandfather. The resemblance wasn't subtle. It was undeniable. "Tamara, this is an old friend from the city," Noreen said, her voice remarkably controlled. "We were just catching up." "Nice to meet you." Tamara smiled polite and warm. "I'm just grabbing lunch before heading back to campus. Big paper due Monday." "Art history," I managed. "Renaissance iconography. Fascinating but brutal," she laughed. "Anyway, I'll leave you 2 alone. Mom, I'll be back Sunday, okay?" She ordered coffee to go, waved at her mother, and left. She smiled at me, her father, and had no idea. None at all. I watched my daughter walk out of that cafe to drive back to Columbia, where my son was waiting, where they had already met, where a love neither understood was pulling them toward catastrophe. Noreen's hand trembled as she gripped her coffee cup. "She mentions a boy sometimes," she whispered. "From her economics class. His name is Everett. Dean Wolf's office was 3 blocks from my corporate headquarters, close enough to reach in 8 minutes, far enough that no one from my world would ever notice I was there. I needed proof. Not speculation, not timeline calculations, not maternal instinct about my mother's capacity for cruelty. I needed documented evidence of what Constance did in 1999, and I needed someone who could find it without triggering her surveillance network. Dean Wolf came recommended through channels I'd cultivated over years of quiet rebellion against my mother's control. A board member's divorce attorney knew a forensic accountant, who knew an investigator who specialized in cases where wealthy families tried to bury inconvenient truths. The referral came with a single line of endorsement. He finds what doesn't want to be found. The office occupied the third floor of a building that had seen better decades. No receptionist, no corporate branding. Just a frosted glass door with a name stenciled in black letters and a buzzer that required 3 rings before anyone answered. Dean Wolfe opened the door himself. 45 years old, built like someone who'd done physical work before sitting behind desks, with the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd seen enough human ugliness to be surprised by very little. He wore jeans and a button-down shirt, no tie, no pretense of corporate polish. "You're Prescott," he said, not a question. "Yes." "Come in. Leave your phone on the desk by the door. What I show you doesn't get recorded." I complied. He led me into an office that looked like an evidence room, filing cabinets, computers with multiple monitors, whiteboards covered in timelines and connections written in precise handwriting. This was a man who built his investigative career on finding paper trails others thought were erased. "I need to know what my mother did in 1999, I said without preamble, "and I need to know today." Dean sat behind his desk and pulled out a legal pad. "Family cases are always the ugliest. What am I looking for specifically? A woman named Noreen Upshaw. She was paid to disappear in April 1999. I need to know the exact terms of that arrangement, who facilitated it, and what happened after she took the money. You think your mother did more than just pay her off?" "I know she did. I need proof." Dean studied me for a long moment. "This is about protecting someone. 2 people, my children, and I have very little time." He named a retainer that would have made most people flinch. $50,000 non-refundable with additional billing at $500 an hour. I wrote the check without hesitation. "Preliminary findings by end of day," Dean said, taking the check. "Full investigation takes longer, but I can tell you within 12 hours if there's a prosecutable case." I left his office at 10:30 and returned to Prescott Holdings to maintain the fiction of normalcy. Board meetings, budget reviews, the performance of being a man who wasn't watching his family disintegrate in real time. Dean called at 4:30. Get back here," he said. "You need to see this." I made an excuse about a property inspection and drove back to his office. He'd converted the whiteboard into a timeline that made my blood run cold. 5 separate incidents targeting Noreen Upshaw across 25 years. Dean said, walking me through it. Break-in attempt in Queens 2001. Witness reported seeing a man fleeing when alarm triggered, but nothing was stolen. Hit and run, near miss in Brooklyn, 2006. Driver mounted the sidewalk where she was walking. Missed by inches, never caught. Apartment fire in Cold Spring, 2012. Arson investigators ruled it suspicious, but couldn't prove cause. Mugging attempt with a knife in 2018. Car brake tampering in 2023. I stared at the timeline. 5 attempts. 5 times someone had tried to kill Noreen. "My mother," I said. Dean nodded. "Pattern is consistent with professional hits made to look accidental or random. Each incident filed under different jurisdictions, so no one connected them. But aggregated, it's clear. Someone wanted Noreen Upshaw dead very badly. But she's alive. That's the strange part." Dean pulled up security footage on his computer. Every single attempt failed, not because she got lucky, because someone intervened. He showed me 3 separate files. The first was a police report from the 2001 break-in. Witness statement mentioned seeing 2 men, one fleeing, one pursuing. The second was grainy security camera footage from 2012 showing the apartment fire. In the background, barely visible. A figure in dark clothing helping residents evacuate before firefighters arrived. The third was crystal clear footage from 2023. A man in a dark jacket approaching Noreen's car in a parking garage, checking underneath, examining the wheel wells. Who protects a woman for 25 years without ever making contact, without ever asking for payment? It's same person, I asked. Dean zoomed in on the 2023 footage, enhancing the image until I could see the man's profile. 40s athletic build, professional movements that suggested military or law enforcement training. I cross-referenced witness descriptions from all 5 incidents. Height, build, movement patterns. It's the same operative. This man has been keeping Noreen Upshaw alive since at least 2001, maybe earlier. I sat down heavily. Someone had been protecting Noreen for a quarter century. Through 5 assassination attempts orchestrated by my mother, someone had been there, watching, intervening, keeping her alive. Who would do that? I asked. Who would protect her for 25 years? Dean pulled up the clearest footage, the 2023 parking garage incident. The protector disabled whoever had tampered with Noreen's brakes, then vanished before police arrived. Professional, precise, committed. And someone with resources training and a reason, Dean said. Question is, did you hire him, or did someone else? I didn't hire anyone. I didn't even know she was alive until 3 days ago. 5 attempts, 5 failures, 1 ghost keeping her alive. Dean froze the footage on a single frame, the protector's hand on Noreen's car door, checking for tampering. Whoever this is, Dean said quietly, he's been running a protection detail for a quarter century. That takes money commitment and orders from someone with serious resources. He looked at me. Did you hire him? Because if you didn't, someone else has been keeping your secrets alive. I needed to know if I had a guardian angel I didn't remember hiring, or if someone else had been playing a longer game than I understood. I invited my mother to dinner alone. No Vivica, no staff, just the 2 of us in the East Wing dining room, where she had taught me as a boy that power meant never showing your hand. The question Dean asked haunted me if I hadn't hired the protector, who had someone with resources, had been keeping Noreen alive for 25 years. Someone who knew about the assassination attempts. Someone who cared enough to intervene 5 separate times across 2 decades. I needed to understand what my mother knew, and the only way to extract truth from Constance Prescott was to make her think she was still in control. The dinner was my idea framed as quarterly estate business that required privacy. My mother accepted without suspicion. We'd done this ritual for years, formal meals where she updated me on trust modifications and succession planning, reminding me that she still held ultimate authority over the $180 million in assets I merely managed. She arrived at 7:15 wearing pearls and a charcoal suit, every inch the matriarch who had built an empire through calculated cruelty. We sat at opposite ends of the mahogany table, crystal glasses, sterling silver, the choreography of wealth that disguised the warfare underneath. For the first 20 minutes, I played the expected role. I discussed quarterly reports from the subsidiaries, property valuations in the Hamptons portfolio, dividend distribution strategies. She listened with the attention of a woman who had spent 80 years ensuring no detail escaped her scrutiny. Then I pivoted. Mother, I need to ask you about something from a long time ago. She set down her wineglass with precision. Business or family? Both. I've been thinking about 1999, about decisions that were made. No reaction. Her face remained composed, but I saw the fractional tightening around her eyes. She knew exactly what year I meant. 1999 was a significant year for Prescott Holdings, she said smoothly. We completed the Ashford merger, restructured the real estate division. What specifically are you questioning? Not the business, the personal. I leaned forward slightly. What happened to Noreen Upshaw in 1999? The name landed between us like a grenade. She didn't ask who, didn't pause to search her memory, didn't fumble for context. She knew exactly who Noreen Upshaw was. That woman was a gold digger who tried to trap you into a bad marriage. Constance said, her tone as polished as if she'd been waiting 25 years for this question. I protected you. The lack of surprise was damning. No confusion, no need for clarification. Just instant recognition and immediate deflection. Protected me how exactly, I asked. She took a deliberate sip of wine. You were 30 years old, married to Vivica, with responsibilities to this family. That museum girl had no breeding, no connections, no understanding of what our world requires. She was entirely unsuitable. You didn't answer my question. I convinced her to accept a settlement and leave New York. $200,000. She signed paperwork agreeing never to contact you again. She took the money and disappeared. End of story. The answer came too fast, too smooth. No hesitation, no searching for details from a quarter century ago. She had this response ready, polished, and waiting. How many times had she practiced these lies in the mirror, preparing for the day I would finally ask? Did you threaten her? I pressed. Constance's expression hardened. I did what any mother would do. I protected my son from a woman who would ruin him. You were building a future with appropriate connections. She was a distraction at best, a liability at worst. That's not an answer. That's a speech you've been rehearsing for decades. She set her napkin beside her plate with controlled precision. I don't know what you're implying, Kenton, but I suggest you remember who has maintained this family's position while you played at being the dutiful heir. That girl left because she was smart enough to take the money and recognize she didn't belong in our world. You're lying. The accusation hung in the air. My mother's face remained perfectly composed, but something flickered in her eyes, calculation measuring how much I knew versus how much I was guessing. Tell me the truth, I said quietly. Did you force her to leave? Force is such a dramatic word. She picked up her wine glass again, the picture of aristocratic control. I presented options. I made clear the consequences of continuing an inappropriate liaison. I protected family interests. That's what leadership requires, making difficult decisions others are too weak to make. Every word was perfect. Every deflection landed smoothly. She wasn't confessing to anything specific, wasn't admitting to threats or coercion, but she wasn't denying knowledge either. This was a woman who had spent 25 years preparing her defense. She wasn't confessing. She was performing a script she'd written 25 years ago. "What if I told you she's still alive?" I asked. Constance paused for exactly 2 seconds, long enough to suggest surprise, short enough to maintain composure. Then she took my advice and built a life elsewhere. Good for her. "What if I told you she had a child?" Another pause, perfectly calibrated. "Many women have children, Kenton. What does this have to do with estate business? What if that child was mine?" She set the wine glass down and folded her hands in her lap. "Then you would have known about it 25 years ago, wouldn't you? Unless you're suggesting this woman hid a pregnancy and raised a child without ever mentioning it to the father, which would make her exactly the kind of manipulative person I warned you about." The logic was airtight. The delivery was flawless. She had an answer for everything because she'd spent 2.5 decades preparing for this conversation. "You knew," I said. "You've always known." Constance stood from the table, smoothing her suit with elegant precision. "You're chasing ghosts, Kenton. That woman is gone. Let her stay gone. Focus on your actual family, your wife, your son, the legacy you're supposed to be preserving." But I had seen it. In the millisecond before her mask returned, I had seen the truth. She knew Noreen wasn't gone. She knew exactly where Noreen was, and she knew about Tamara. My mother folded her napkin with surgical precision. "You're chasing ghosts, Kenton," she said, her voice as cold as the chandelier above us. "That woman is gone. Let her stay gone." But I had seen the truth in the millisecond before her mask returned. She knew Noreen wasn't gone. She knew exactly where Noreen was, and she knew about Tamara. The war wasn't coming. It was already here. Viveka moved through the Columbia University donor reception like a surgeon selecting instruments, identifying the 3 women whose whispers could destroy a reputation before breakfast. The war had begun the moment I left that dinner with Constance. I knew it with cold certainty when Dean called me at midnight. "Your wife was at Columbia last night," he said. "Art patron event. She spoke privately with Cynthia Ashford, Margaret Sutherland, and Eleanor Richmond, all mothers with daughters in Everett's year. 3 different girls received calls from their mothers this morning with the same story: watch out for a gold digger named Tamara Upshaw, targeting the Prescott heir." I stood in my home office looking across the hall toward the bedroom I shared with Vivica Prescott, 50 years old, who had built her art gallery empire less on taste than on leveraging her husband's name and connections. She'd married me because Constance arranged it. She'd stayed married because divorce from a Prescott meant losing access to the world that defined her value. And now she was attacking my daughter. "How fast is it spreading?" I asked. Instagram posts started this morning, veiled nothing actionable but clear enough. Some girls come to Columbia for education, others for MRS degrees. Gold diggers think they're subtle, but we see you. The usual elite exclusion tactics. I closed my eyes. Viveka didn't know Tamara was mine. She thought she was protecting Everett from an unsuitable girl doing exactly what Constance had trained her to do: defend family position through social warfare. "What's Tamara's exposure?" I asked. "She's visible. Scholarship student, no family money, dating the Prescott heir. She's the perfect target for this kind of campaign. And she has no defense infrastructure, no connected parents, no donor relationships, no social capital to fight back." Monitor it," I said. "I want to know every move." Over the next 48 hours, I watched my daughter suffer from a distance I couldn't close without revealing everything. Dean's campus contacts sent report study group disbanded Tamara, suddenly uninvited. Instagram stories from art history, classmates at coffee shops, everyone except Tamara. A teaching assistant who'd been friendly now responding to her emails with curt professionalism. The systematic freeze-out that wealthy students had perfected over generations. Everett noticed something was wrong. Dean's source in the economics department reported a conversation. "People are looking at me differently," Tamara told him in the campus center. "Like I did something wrong." "You're imagining it," Everett said. "Everyone loves you." But she wasn't imagining it. She was experiencing the reality of being targeted by people who controlled social architecture through inheritance and connections. Everett couldn't see it because he'd never been the target. He lived inside the protection of the Prescott name. She lived outside it. vulnerable to exactly the kind of calculated destruction Viveka was orchestrating. I was watching my daughter be destroyed by my wife, and I couldn't tell either of them the truth. On December 5th, Dean called with an urgent update. It's escalating. 3 girls, Rebecca Ashford, Caroline Sutherland, Amanda Richmond, are planning a public confrontation. Butler Library this afternoon. They want to humiliate her in front of witnesses. Can you stop it? Not without revealing you're monitoring the situation, and I don't have authority to intervene in student conflicts. Where will Everett be? Economics study session. Same building, different floor. If they time it right, et courst, el endico pifpatesto. They'll make sure he sees it. I finished. Force him to choose publicly. I couldn't be there. Couldn't protect her without exposing why I cared about a girl I had no acknowledged connection to. The helplessness was choking. At 4:30 that afternoon, Dean's contact sent a real-time update via text. It's happening. I sat in my Manhattan office imagining what I couldn't see Tamara at her usual study table in Butler Library surrounded by art history texts. Working on the Renaissance iconography paper she had mentioned to me in that Cold Spring Cafe when she had no idea I was her father. 3 young women approaching, daughters of wealth, who'd been told by their mothers that Tamara Upshaw was a threat, a gold digger, an interloper who needed to be driven out. The attack wouldn't be physical, it would be surgical, loud enough for witnesses designed to humiliate, calculated to break. Dean called 5 minutes later. Rebecca Ashford just asked Tamara in front of 30 students if she Googled Everett's net worth before their first date. Caroline suggested scholarship students should focus on academics instead of hunting rich husbands. Amanda told her everyone knows why she's really at Columbia. The attack wasn't whispered anymore. It was shouted in a library full of witnesses. What did Tamara do? I asked. Tried to defend herself quietly, told them they didn't know anything about her relationship. But the damage is done, everyone's watching, phones are out. This will be all over campus by tonight. And Everett... Dean paused. He walked in 30 seconds ago. He's standing at the entrance to the reading room. He can see everything. I gripped the phone, imagining my son frozen 10 feet from the girl he loved, watching her be torn apart by his own social class, calculating the cost of intervention. If he defended her, he confirmed the relationship, made it real, made it something his family would actively destroy. If he stayed silent, he protected himself, maintained plausible deniability, let her suffer alone. The choice would define who he was. What's he doing? I asked. Nothing yet, just watching. Everett stood 10 feet from Tamara's table, watching 3 students tear apart the girl he loved, and I knew exactly what he was calculating. Defend her and confirm the relationship his family would destroy, or stay silent and protect himself. The choice he made in that library would define who he was, and I couldn't be there to tell him the truth that would make the choice impossible. The social war was destroying my daughter while I hunted for proof of the conspiracy that created her. The surveillance room behind the East Wing Library had been my secret for 12 years installed, after my mother tried to remove me from the truss cameras hidden in crown molding. Microphones disguised as smoke detectors, everything Constance thought she controlled, quietly feeding into drives she never knew existed. Dean called me at 10 that night. With the library aftermath, Everett had walked over to Tamara's table, told the 3 attackers to leave, and escorted her out of Butler Library in front of everyone. He'd chosen her, but the damage was done, the rumors were now confirmed fact, and the social warfare would escalate. I needed leverage, not rumors or calculated guesses, but hard evidence of what my mother and wife were planning. If they were willing to destroy Tamara socially, they would escalate to something worse. I'd learned that lesson in the decades I'd spent watching Constance eliminate obstacles. At 2:30 in the morning, when the estate was silent, I entered the library and triggered the hidden panel behind the 3rd bookshelf from the left. The surveillance room appeared a space no larger than a walk-in closet lined with monitors and hard drives. A chair I'd sat in countless times over 12 years, whenever I needed to understand what was really happening in my mother's empire. I'd built this room in 2012, the year she tried to restructure the trust, to cut me out of succession entirely. She'd failed, but the attempt taught me a critical lesson. The only way to survive Constance Prescott was to know everything she thought was secret. So I'd hired contractors she couldn't trace, installed a system she couldn't detect. And for 12 years, I'd been recording every conversation in every room except the bedrooms. Every dinner, every meeting, every whispered conspiracy. I pulled up footage from the past 72 hours and started scanning. Constance's study, The dining room, the East Wing parlor, anywhere she and Vivica might have met to discuss their strategy. At 3:15 a.m. I found it. December 6th, 1:03 in the morning. Constance's private study. Viveka entering through the door she thought was locked to everyone else. Both women believing they were completely alone. I put on headphones and hit play. Viveka's voice came through crystal clear. The Columbia strategy is working. She's isolated, humiliated. The art history department is freezing her out of study groups. But Everett still defends her. Constance sat in her leather chair, the one that had belonged to my grandfather. Humiliation isn't enough. The girl knows too much even if she doesn't realize it yet. What do you mean she knows too much? She has her mother's face. Anyone who looks carefully will see the resemblance to Kenton. If she starts asking questions about her father, if she traces her own history, you think she knows? I think she's dangerous whether she knows or not. Constance leaned forward. Social warfare buys us time, but it doesn't solve the fundamental problem. That girl exists. As long as she exists, she's a threat to family stability. I was listening to my mother and my wife plan the murder of my daughter, and they had no idea I was their audience. Viveka's response came carefully. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we handle this the way we should have handled it 25 years ago, permanently. A pause on the recording. Then, Viveka. I have people who can make problems disappear. They've done it before. It would need to look natural, accident depression, something that doesn't invite investigation. Can they move quickly? How quickly? Constance's answer was cold. Before Christmas, before Everett does something stupid like proposing to her, before she figures out who she is and makes claims on the family. My hand gripped the edge of the desk. They were planning this with the same clinical detachment they had used to discuss property acquisitions. Staging an accident takes planning, Viveka said. Resources? These people don't work cheap. How much? For a clean job, $12 million, half up front, half on completion. $12 million. The number landed like a physical blow. They were putting a price on my daughter's murder. Constance didn't hesitate. I'll arrange the transfer. Offshore accounts untraceable. But I want it done before winter break. Students scatter, people disappear for holidays. It's the perfect window. Accident or suicide? Viveka asked. Which plays better publicly? I don't care how it looks. I care that she's gone before Christmas. Make it happen. The recording continued with logistics account numbers, contact protocols, plausible deniability structures. But I'd heard enough. Before Christmas, my mother said. 2 weeks. They had given my daughter 2 weeks to live. I stopped the playback and sat in the darkness, forcing myself to breathe. They were going to kill Tamara. Not eventually, not as a last resort, but immediately. Within 2 weeks. The social warfare at Columbia wasn't the main strategy. It was the cover story. Isolated girl. No friends' academic pressure, tragic suicide, or accident that no one would question too closely. My mother had done this before. Dean's investigation proved it 5 attempts on Noreen's life over 25 years. This wasn't new territory for Constance. This was her standard methodology. Identify, problem, eliminate, problem, move on. But she'd made one catastrophic mistake. She'd confessed to premeditated murder in a house where every word was recorded. I copied the footage to 3 separate encrypted drives. The original stayed in the surveillance system. 1 copy went into my personal safe deposit box. 1 went to a lawyer I trusted more than family. The 3rd I would give to Dean Wolfe with instructions to deliver it to federal authorities if anything happened to me. The recording was dated time-stamped, showed both women clearly visible and audible. It captured them discussing payment timeline and explicit intent to commit murder. No defense attorney in the world could explain this away. I finally had what I needed to destroy them both. But the recording also revealed something terrifying. They had already hired someone. These people don't work cheap, Viveka had said. They've done it before. Past tense. She had an existing relationship with professional killers, which meant somewhere out there, a hired assassin was already moving toward my daughter on a 2-week timeline, paid $12 million to make her death look natural. The recording stopped at 1:47 a.m., and I sat in the darkness with the weight of what I'd just witnessed. My mother and my wife had just signed my daughter's death warrant $12 million. 2-week timeline staged accident. But they had made one catastrophic mistake. They had confessed to murder in a house where every word was recorded. I finally had the proof I needed to destroy them both. But first I needed to find out who they'd already hired to kill her. Dean answered on the first ring at 3:42 a.m., and before I could tell him about the recording, he said, I found the money trail meet me at a storage facility in the Bronx at dawn. I had the surveillance footage showing my mother and wife planning murder. Dean had the financial trail leading to whoever they had hired. The pieces were converging, but we were racing against a 2-week timeline that might be much shorter. I took an unmarked car and drove through pre-dawn darkness to an address in the industrial Bronx, a commercial storage complex that had seen better decades, surrounded by chain-link fence and security cameras that probably hadn't worked in years. Dean was waiting in the parking lot when I arrived at 6 a.m., holding 2 cups of coffee and a set of bolt cutters. "What is this place?" I asked. "And former headquarters of Apex Security Solutions," Dean said. "Operated from 1995 through 2015. They specialized in what they called sensitive corporate matters, which meant making problems disappear for clients who could afford discretion." "How did you find it?" "The 12 million payment traces back through 3 shell companies. All of them connect here. The owner died in 2015, the business went bankrupt, and the creditors didn't want the liability of old files, so they just locked the doors and walked away. Took me 4 hours to get access through bankruptcy court records." He cut the padlock on the loading dock entrance. Inside the facility was exactly what Dean described: rows of metal shelving, holding bankers' boxes covered in decade-old dust. File cabinets marked with years and case categories, the archived evidence of crimes nobody wanted to prosecute. "What are we looking for?" I asked. "Proof that your mother's been using these people for 25 years, and hopefully identification of who she's using now." We searched methodically. Dean had brought photos of the financial records account, numbers, dates, transaction codes, looking for matches in the physical archives. At 6:45, he found it. "Here." Dean pulled a thick manila folder from a file cabinet marked Active Contracts 1995 to 2005. The tab read Upshaw N. Long-Term Protection Detail Inverse. Inverse, not protection, elimination. I opened the folder. Inside were detailed contracts documenting 5 separate assassination attempts. June 2001, break-in at Queen's apartment. Status failed. External intervention. October 2006, vehicle pedestrian incident Brooklyn. Status failed. External intervention. March 2012, residential fire, Cold Spring. Status failed. External intervention. August 2018, street attack weapon assault. Status failed. External intervention. November 2023, vehicle brake tampering. Status failed. External intervention. Every attempt meticulously documented. Every failure attributed to the same mysterious factor, someone else protecting Noreen. 5 separate contracts, I said. All failed because someone kept saving her. Dean flipped through the pages. Notes here reference unknown protective detail operating outside contracted parameters. They tried to identify who was protecting her, but couldn't. Professional work military-grade intervention never made contact with the target. My mother's elegant handwriting documented 25 years of attempted murder, signed and notarized like a business contract. "The question is who signed the original contract authorizing all of this," Dean said. He turned to the final page. The authorization signature sat above a notary stamp dated May 15, 1999. The handwriting was distinctive, elegant, unmistakable. I had seen it on birthday cards, trust documents, corporate memoranda for 55 years. Constance Margot Prescott. Dean pulled comparison samples from his briefcase estate documents, board minutes, stock certificates bearing my mother's verified signature. He laid them side by side with the contract authorization. Perfect match. The characteristic loop on the capital C, the terminal flourish on the final T, the way she crossed her P with slightly more pressure than the downstroke. My mother had signed a contract to have Noreen Upshaw killed 3 months after paying her to disappear. The settlement was never meant to make Noreen go away. It was meant to make her vulnerable, isolated, easier to eliminate. Notarized 1999, Dean said quietly. Initial payment $2 million. Annual retainer $100,000. Performance bonuses per successful termination. I read the contract terms. It wasn't just a one-time hit. It was an ongoing relationship, a kept assassin, someone my mother paid yearly to remain available, to keep trying until the target was eliminated or the contract was terminated. "Look at the renewal clause," Dean said. I found it in the appendix, contract renewable annually upon client authorization and payment of retainer. Non-renewal requires 90-day written notice. Dean flipped to the payment ledger attached to the file. 25 years of transactions all cleared. $100,000, January of every year, like clockwork, including January 2024. The retainer was active, right now, today. Someone was waiting for the call to kill my daughter. She's been paying this assassin for 25 years, I said, and he's still under contract. Which means the $12 million payment isn't hiring someone new, Dean said. It's activating someone who's been on retainer for decades. Someone who knows the target, knows the pattern, knows how to make it look natural. My hands were shaking. The clinical precision of it was overwhelming. My mother hadn't just tried to kill Noreen once and moved on. She'd maintained a professional relationship with a killer for 25 years, renewing annually, keeping him available for the moment when elimination became necessary again. Dean turned to the final ledger entry. Look at this. December 6th, 2024, 2 lines. Activation bonus $500,000. Wire confirmed. Final payment upon completion, $11,500,000. Held in escrow. The same night I'd recorded Constance and Vivica's conversation. The same night they had discussed the 2-week timeline. They hadn't just planned the murder. They had already activated the killer. Dean turned to the appendix pages showing payment ledger. 25 years of $100,000 deposits all cleared, but the final entry made my blood stop. December 6th, 2024. Activation bonus, $500,000. Wire confirmed. The same night I recorded Constance and Viveka's conversation. They hadn't just planned the murder. They had already activated the killer. My daughter had maybe days, not weeks, and I didn't know who was coming for her. Through the surveillance feed, I watched my mother arrange papers on her desk like a prosecutor preparing for trial. And my 20-year-old son walked into her study with no idea he was about to be dismantled. The assassin was activated. Somewhere out there, a professional killer was moving toward Tamara on a timeline I couldn't predict. I needed Dean to identify who from the contract files, needed to establish protection, needed to act. But first, I had to witness this Constance's next move in real time, captured on cameras she still didn't know existed. Everett had been summoned for what Constance called an important family meeting regarding his future. He arrived at 7:30, dressed in the casual confidence of someone who'd never been truly afraid of his own grandmother. Viveka was already there, seated beside Constance in a show of unified parental authority. I watched from the surveillance room as my mother smiled, the expression she used when she was about to destroy someone while convincing them it was for their own good. "Everett, sit," Constance said. "We have extraordinary news." He sat across from them, cautious but curious. "What kind of news?" "The London School of Economics has a specialized program," Constance began. 3 years highly selective full scholarship. Only 10 students accepted globally. I pulled considerable strings to secure your placement. A's? I saw Everett's expression shift, flattered then, suspicious. LSE? That's prestigious, but what? Viveka asked. Most students would be grateful for this kind of opportunity. Why now I'm in the middle of junior year? This doesn't make sense. Constance leaned forward. Because opportunities like this don't wait. You leave January 10th. 3-year commitment with guaranteed placement in top London financial firms afterward. This is your path to independence, Everett. Real independence, not the trust fund allowance you've been living on. I could see him calculating. January 10th was 5 weeks away. 3 years in London meant 3 years away from Columbia, away from Tamara. "This is about her," Everett said quietly. "This is about Tamara." Constance didn't flinch. "This is about your future. That girl is a campus distraction." "She's not a distraction. I love her." "You're 20 years old," Viveka said, her tone sharpening. "You don't know what love is. You know infatuation. You know rebellion against family expectations. What you don't know is how quickly unsuitable attachments can destroy everything you're supposed to become." Everett stood. "I'm not doing this. I'm not leaving Columbia, and I'm not leaving Tamara because you've decided she's not good enough for the Prescott name." Constance's smile disappeared. "Sit down." The command had weight. Everett sat. "You misunderstand the situation," Constance said. "This isn't a request. This is a choice. Accept the LSE program and end your inappropriate relationship with that girl, or lose everything. Trust fund access, frozen immediately. Columbia connections severed. I sit on 3 boards that fund your scholarships. The Prescott name, which has opened every door you've walked through, weaponized against you instead. You can't. I absolutely can, and I will." Constance's voice was ice. You're not the only one at risk here, Everett. That girl Tamara has built a fragile position at Columbia. Scholarship student. No family support, already socially isolated, thanks to recent rumors. How long do you think she'd survive a formal investigation into academic fraud, criminal accusations of using false credentials, a very public expulsion? I was watching my son be broken by my mother, and I couldn't stop it without revealing everything, including the truth that would destroy him. Everett's face went pale. She hasn't done anything wrong? That's irrelevant, Viveka said. What matters is what we can make people believe. Refuse this opportunity and we'll make sure that girl never works in this city again. We'll make her name synonymous with fraud. Every future employer will see the accusations first. This isn't about protecting me, Everett said. This is about control. This is about you choosing wisely between a girl and your entire future, Constance said. You can go to London, build a real career, and spare her the consequences of your stubbornness. Or you can cling to campus romance and watch us destroy her completely. The trap was perfect. Everett could defy them and lose everything while watching Tamara suffer worse, or he could comply and believe he was protecting her through distance. My mother was a master. She'd framed surrender as noble sacrifice. Everett sat in silence for a long time. I could see him aging in real time, the weight of impossible choices pressing down on 20-year-old shoulders. If I sign this, he finally said, his voice hollow, you leave her alone completely. You have my word, Constance said. The girl will be untouched. The pause before untouched was deliberate, a promise that meant nothing. Viveka slid papers across the desk. Study abroad agreement, departure January 10th, 3-year commitment, sign here. The pen touched paper. My son signed away his future to save the sister he didn't know he had. His hand shook as he wrote his name. Viveka witnessed the signature, making the document legally binding. Everett didn't look up, just pushed the papers back across the desk and stood. Can I go? He asked. Of course, Constance said warmly. And Everett, you made the right choice. You're protecting her from something much worse than a broken heart. He left without responding. The door closed behind him with quiet finality. I had recorded the entire extortion. Every threat, every manipulation, every illegal coercion captured on surveillance that would stand up in any court. Evidence that would destroy both Constance and Viveka completely. But I'd paid for that evidence with my son's devastation. Constance waited exactly 10 seconds after Everett's departure. Then she turned to Viveka with the cold smile I knew too well. The boy's handled, she said. Now proceed with the permanent solution. I want the Upshaw girl gone before he leaves for London. No delays, no failures this time. Viveka nodded. I'll confirm the activation. Target timeline within 72 hours. Make it look natural. Accident suicide. Something that won't invite investigation. It's already arranged. Everett left the study with slumped shoulders, believing he'd made a noble sacrifice. Constance waited until the door closed, then turned to Viveka with a cold smile I could see perfectly on camera. The boy's handled, she said. Now proceed with the permanent solution. I want the Upshaw girl gone before he leaves for London. The false defeat was complete. My son thought he'd protected Tamara by leaving, but he'd just removed the only witness who might notice when the assassin moved. I scheduled the meeting for 2 p.m. on December 10th at the trust offices in Westchester, sent formal invitations to my mother and wife, and spent the morning practicing how a defeated man holds his shoulders. 72 hours. That's what Constance had given the assassin. I'd watched the surveillance footage 3 more times, memorizing every word, every gesture, building the case I would eventually use to destroy them both. But first, I needed them overconfident victorious, certain they'd won. The trust attorney's conference room overlooked rolling hills that had belonged to Prescott family interests since the 1940s. Oak paneling, leather chairs, the architectural language of old money that believed itself permanent. I arrived early and positioned myself at the far end of the table, not the head where authority sat, but 3 seats down where someone surrendering territory might choose. I wore a suit that needed pressing, carried documents and folders that looked hastily assembled, let exhaustion show in my posture. Constance and Viveka arrived exactly on time. My mother wore her pearl gray suit, the armor of executive power. Viveka carried a designer bag that probably cost more than most people earned in a month. They expected confrontation. Instead, they found me staring at paperwork like a man who'd run out of fight. Thank you for coming, I said, not standing. I called this meeting because I've been fighting battles I can't win. It's time to acknowledge reality. Constance sat at the head of the table, her natural position. This is unexpected. What exactly are you proposing? A restructuring that gives you the control you've always believed you should have. I slid documents across the polished wood. Everett's decision to study abroad was a wake-up call. I've been so focused on managing the business that I lost sight of what matters: family harmony. The trust attorney, a man named Harrison who'd worked with Prescott Holdings for 15 years, reviewed the documents I'd prepared. His expression was carefully neutral, but I could see the surprise. He'd expected me to fight any transfer of authority, not initiate it. How long would it take them to realize that a man who built a surveillance empire would never surrender without embedding his own insurance? Viveka studied the cover page. What are these subsidiaries? The Media Acquisition Division and the European Real Estate Portfolio, I said. Combined asset value of $340 million. I'm proposing operational control transfers to a family oversight board chaired by Constance. All major decisions would require board approval. Constance read more carefully now. And your role: advisory, legal compliance oversight. The structure allows board majority rule on operations. I paused as if the next words cost me. I retain certain signature authorities for regulatory requirements, but effective control would be yours. It was perfect bait. The language appeared to grant her power, while burying my veto authority in technical clauses about fiduciary responsibility and legal mandates. Harrison had helped me craft it unknowingly, believing I was genuinely seeking compromise. Why now? Viveka asked. 2 weeks ago, you wouldn't have considered this. 2 weeks ago, I thought I could manage everything alone. Then I watched my son choose London over Colombia because of family conflict. I don't want Everett's future destroyed because I was too proud to admit my mother's judgment might be better than mine. The lie tasted like ash, but I delivered it with the conviction of a man who'd lost. Constance reviewed every page. She was thorough, always had been. But she was also reading through the lens of victory, seeing what she wanted to see: her son finally capitulating, finally acknowledging her superior position. The trust attorney can verify the legal structure, I said. I want this done correctly. Harrison nodded. The documents are legally sound. The operational transfer is clear. Mr. Prescott retains certain authorities related to regulatory compliance and fiduciary duty standard (NTZ). Structures like this, but daily management and strategic decisions would indeed rest with the family board. Constance set the papers down. This is a good start. A start, not acceptance. I'd known she'd push for more. But it's incomplete, she continued. If we're restructuring for family harmony, we need to be thorough. I want full trust administration and permanent appointment irrevocable. Viveka leaned forward. And the Manhattan penthouse should transfer to my name. I've supported this family for 25 years. Call it compensation. They didn't want reconciliation. They wanted annihilation. I let the silence stretch, appearing to absorb the additional demands with the defeated expression of someone who'd already surrendered the important battles and couldn't muster energy to fight over details. Those are significant changes, I said quietly. I need time to review with counsel. How much time? Constance asked. A week, maybe 2. The trust administration role requires board approval across multiple entities. 1 week, Constance said. It wasn't a negotiation. I nodded slowly. I'll have revised documents prepared. Harrison began collecting papers. I'll draft the amendments for review. Given the scope of changes, we should schedule a follow-up meeting for December 17th. Constance stood, and the meeting was over. She'd gotten what she came for: total capitulation and a timeline for complete victory. Viveka gathered her things, already mentally spending the penthouse sale value. This is the right decision, Kenton. Family should come first. They left together, my mother and my wife, discussing their triumph in voices just loud enough for me to hear through the closing door. Harrison stayed behind, organizing documents. Are you certain about this? He asked quietly. These are substantial concessions. I'm tired of fighting, I said, maintaining the performance. Sometimes you have to recognize when you've lost. He nodded sympathetically, seeing what I wanted him to see: a man broken by family warfare, choosing peace over power. What he didn't see was the morality clause buried in Section 12, Subsection 4, Paragraph 3 of the Trust Amendment. Language preserving my authority to freeze all assets within 24 hours upon documented proof of domestic violence conspiracy to harm family members, or financial fraud against trust beneficiaries. Constance and Viveka left the trust office with triumph written across their faces, already planning how to spend the fortune they believed they'd seized. They didn't know that the documents they had just celebrated contained carefully buried language preserving my authority to trigger the morality A clause that would freeze every asset within 24 hours if I could prove domestic violence or conspiracy to harm family members. And I had 20 hours of surveillance footage proving exactly that. Now, I just needed to trace the 12 million before the assassin they had hired struck. Dean had been awake for 36 hours when I walked into his office at 6 a.m. on December 11th. And the wall behind his desk was covered in financial charts that looked like a spider web, designed by someone tracking the devil's accountant. I'd left the trust meeting yesterday afternoon playing defeated. Then I'd called Dean and told him to trace the payment no matter how long it took. The assassin had a timeline. So did we. Coffee cups littered his desk. 3 computer monitors displayed spreadsheets, wire transfer records, and corporate registration databases. Dean looked like hell, but his eyes were sharp. "Tell me you found something," I said. He pointed at the wall chart. 3 shell companies, 4 wire transfers, 6 different banks. Whoever set this up knew what they were doing. Delaware, LLC, Cayman Holding Company. Singapore Private Equity Fund, each one designed to look like legitimate business transactions. "Can you trace it back to the source?" "Already did." Dean pulled up a file on his center monitor. "That's the interesting part. It's not your mother's money." I moved closer. "What?" "The 12 million originated from accounts belonging to Viveka Prescott, specifically accounts tied to her art gallery operation. Viveka, my wife, funding an assassination independently." "Show me," I said. Dean walked me through the trail. December 6th, 217. AM wire transfer of 4 million from Viveka Margot Gallery, limited to Delaware Shell Company Coastal Asset Management. Same day, 4:33 a.m. 3 million from Gallery Consulting account to Cayman Holding Structure, December the 7th. 5 million from Gallery Acquisition Fund to Singapore entity. Her gallery generates 8 to 12 million annually, Dean said. High-end contemporary art sales, private commissions, consulting fees from wealthy collectors. She's been building personal wealth separate from the Prescott marriage for 2 decades. Prenuptial agreement gave her complete control over business income. Why would Viveka use her own fortune to fund murder unless she had something to gain beyond just pleasing Constance? "She's not just helping my mother," I said. "She has her own agenda. Looks that way. This level of financial independence suggests she's been planning something for a long time. And spending 12 million of her own money means she expects a return on investment." I thought about the trust meeting yesterday, Viveka demanding the Manhattan Penthouse Art Gallery, endowment's control over cultural assets. She wasn't just supporting Constance's play for power. She was positioning herself for a share of the spoils. "Where did the money go after the shell companies?" I asked. "That's where it gets clearer." Dean pulled up offshore banking records. Final destination account registered to Meridian Strategic Solutions, security consulting firm based in Geneva. Offices in 12 countries, specializes in executive protection, or in threat elimination. I finished. Dean nodded. "They're careful. Everything appears legitimate on paper: bodyguards, risk assessment, corporate security. But if you know what to look for in their account activity, you see the pattern. High-value payments structured as consulting fees, activation bonuses, escrow arrangements tied to measurable outcomes." He showed me the Meridian account ledger. December 6th, $500,000 deposit notation, activation fee, contract 47B. Same day, 11.5 million transferred to escrow account notation, performance completion, pending verification. "What's the payment structure?" I asked. "Activation fee clears immediately, that's the 500,000. It means the contractor accepted the job and is actively working. The remaining 11.5 million releases only upon confirmed completion of contract terms." "Confirmed death." "Exactly. They won't pay until there's proof the target is eliminated." My hands were shaking. "When is the contract scheduled for completion?" Dean pulled up the contract metadata. "December 20th, 10 days from now. The full payment triggers automatically if the contractor uploads confirmation by that deadline. 9 days. My daughter had 9 days to live. Unless I stopped a professional killer, I still couldn't identify." "Can you identify who accepted the contract?" I asked. Dean hesitated. "I have a contact in private security intelligence. He can access Meridian's internal contractor roster, but it's risky. If they detect the breach, they'll know someone's investigating." "Do it," I said. "Risk doesn't matter if she's dead." He made a call, spoke in codes I didn't understand, hung up, and waited. 5 minutes later, his encrypted email chimed. "Meridian has 3 active specialists in the Northeast region. Dean said, opening the file. One of them accepted a contract activation, December 6th. The profile loaded on screen. Contractor Operative 47. B. Specialization. Staged accidents. Environmental casualties. Success rate. 23 completed assignments. 0 arrests. 0 investigations. Military background. Special operations. Demolitions expert. Current status. Active contract target zone assigned. Dean scrolled down to assignment details. Target zone, Columbia University, Manhattan. Contract value, $12 million. Completion deadline, December 20th, 2024, 23:59. Eastern Standard Time, method parameters. Natural appearing accident, minimal investigation risk. The killer was already watching my daughter. He's on campus right now, I said. Dean nodded grimly. Has been since December 7th. Professional surveillance establishes patterns before execution. He's learning her routine, identifying opportunities, waiting for the perfect moment to make it look accidental. Can we identify him? Get a name, a photo, anything. Meridian protects contractor identities, even from clients. The designation 47B is all we have. But we know his location, his timeline, and his method preferences. That's enough to establish protection. Tamara doesn't know she's in danger. How do we protect her without explaining why? Dean pulled up campus maps. We put our own surveillance on her. Counterintelligence. I have people who can track without being seen. If this assassin makes a move, we'll see it coming. It wasn't enough. Surveillance couldn't stop a professional killer who had 9 days to engineer an accident. I needed to end this completely. Expose the conspiracy, freeze the assets, remove Constance and Viveka's ability to fund anything. I needed to spring the trap. Dean pulled up Meridian's internal contractor roster, accessed through a contact in private security intelligence. They have 3 active specialists in the Northeast region, he said, turning the screen toward me. One of them accepted a contract activation, December 6th. The profile loaded former military expert in staged accidents, 23 successful terminations, 0 arrests. But it was the current assignment location that made my blood freeze. Target zone, Columbia University, Manhattan. The killer was already watching my daughter. 24 hours after my staged surrender, my mother summoned me to the estate boardroom to discuss what she called the transition of authority. And I walked in, knowing this was the moment I would flip the entire board. Dean had surveillance teams watching Tamara at Columbia. The assassin was there too, somewhere in the crowd of students learning her patterns. 9 days until December 20th. But that timeline was about to become irrelevant. Constance and Viveka were already seated when I arrived at 2 p.m. documents spread across the mahogany table. Confident postures of victors dividing spoils. My mother wore her signature pearls. Viveka had dressed for celebration. Thank you for coming promptly, Constance said. Not, thank you for coming, promptly. The language of someone who expected obedience. I sat across from them carrying only a slim folder. You said this was urgent. Now that we've resolved the operational issues, Constance began, it's time to formalize your exit from family business entirely. We've prepared a transition timeline. She slid papers across the table. I read them slowly, letting silence stretch. The timeline was brutal. Removed from all Prescott Holdings boards by January 1st. Trust administration transferred to Constance, permanently irrevocable appointment. Manhattan penthouse deed to Viveka by December 31st. Office cleared by year-end. They'd even drafted a press release, Kenton Prescott steps down to pursue personal interests. We've prepared severance terms, Viveka said. Quite generous considering the circumstances. The circumstances? As if I'd been caught embezzling, rather than simply outmaneuvered by superior forces. You've been thorough, I said. Constance smiled. I've had time to plan. Your recent struggles made the direction clear. There are additional requirements, Viveka added, pulling out more documents. You'll need to publicly endorse the new leadership structure, press conference, Spurspraxstand, full statement supporting the transition. And sign a non-compete, Constance said. 5 years. No real estate development, no financial services, no competing with Prescott interests in any market where we operate. You're ensuring I can't rebuild, I said. I'm ensuring family harmony, Constance corrected. Your signature here acknowledges my sole authority over the $180 million trust fund, effective immediately. Viveka pointed to another page. and here transferring the Westchester art collection to my gallery as consulting fee. 23 pieces appraised at 18 million, non-negotiable. I let them weave the rope they would hang themselves with every demand, another piece of evidence I would use to destroy them. They weren't seeking compromise. They were erasing me. I understand, I said quietly. You want complete control. We want what's best for the family, Constance said. And what's best is clear leadership without internal resistance. She pushed the final document toward me. Your signature transfers operational authority across all remaining holdings. The board ratifies this Friday. By Monday, the transition is complete. I stared at the papers. Let them see a man calculating whether he had any moves left. Then I stood, pulled my folder from my briefcase, set it on the table between us. Before I reveal what those documents from December 10th actually contain, comment A, if you think I should have exposed them immediately, or B, if waiting was strategic, and tell me why in 5 to 10 words. Please note what follows includes some adapted details for narrative impact, but the core truth is what matters. If fictionalized elements aren't for you, this is a natural stopping point. Before you sign anything else, I said, my voice perfectly calm, let me clarify what I actually control. Constance's smile flickered. We've been over this. The December 10th agreement transferred the December 10th agreement transferred operational control of 2 subsidiaries. I interrupted, but it preserved my final signature authority on all major transactions exceeding $10 million. It also preserved my exclusive power to activate what's known as the morality clause. Viveka leaned forward. The morality clause is ceremonial. It's never been used. It activates when the trust administrator, that's still me. Mother check the legal language provides documented proof of domestic violence, conspiracy to harm family members, or financial fraud against trust beneficiaries. I opened my folder. Upon activation, all trust assets freeze within 24 hours pending investigation. I slid the first document across the table. Surveillance screenshot, Constance and Viveka in her study. December 6th, 1:03 a.m. This is from my security system, the one you told me to surrender access to. I slid another page. Transcript of your conversation planning Tamara Upshaw's assassination. Your voices, your words. Timestamped and notarized. Constance's face went white. I slid the 1999 contract from the Bronx facility. Your signature, Mother, authorizing 25 years of assassination attempts, notarized May 15, 1999. Viveka stared at the shell company payment records, her gallery accounts, the $12 million wire trail to Meridian Strategic Solutions. Every payment documented, I said. Every shell company traced. Every conversation recorded. You hired a professional killer to murder my daughter. Yes, Tamara is my biological daughter. And you knew it, and you did it using Viveka's personal fortune while planning to steal mine. The Empress had no clothes. The tyrant had no throne. And I held every card they thought they'd won. This is blackmail, Constance whispered. I leaned across the table. No, Mother, this is checkmate. You have exactly one move. Left call, off the assassin you hired, cancel the Meridian contract. And pray I don't activate the morality clause anyway, or refuse, and watch me freeze every penny of that $180 million trust, while federal prosecutors arrest you both for conspiracy to commit murder. Viveka's hands were shaking. You can't prove... I can prove everything. I have recordings. I have contracts with your signatures. I have financial trails showing the payments. Dean Wolfe has already compiled the evidence package for federal authorities. It's sitting in his office right now, ready to file the moment I give the word. Constance's hands shook as she stared at the surveillance screenshots, showing her own handwriting on the 1999 assassination contract. Viveka's face had gone white, realizing every shell company payment was documented. This is blackmail, Constance whispered. I leaned across the table. No, Mother, this is checkmate, and you have exactly one move left. Stop the assassin you hired, or watch me activate the morality clause and freeze every penny while the police arrest you both for conspiracy to commit murder. The war had just gone from shadow to sunlight. Dean's text arrived at 3:47 p.m. Your mother just entered Columbia campus, heading toward Tamara's dorm. And I knew that a cornered predator is always most dangerous. 60 minutes after I delivered checkmate in the estate boardroom, Constance had left the building without a word. Viveka had followed pale and silent. I'd thought they were regrouping. calculating their next move with the cold strategy that had sustained them for decades. I was wrong. Constance was done with strategy. I called Dean immediately. Are your people in position? 2 surveillance units on campus. She's approaching Butler Library now. Do not intervene, I said. I want to see what she does. 3 minutes later, Dean sent video feed from his team's phone camera. Constance Prescott, 80 years old, wearing her pearl gray suit and carrying herself like visiting royalty, approached a young woman exiting the library with an armload of art history texts. My daughter. I put in my earpiece and listened. Miss Upshaw. Constance's voice was gracious, warm. I'm Constance Prescott Everett's grandmother. Might we speak privately, yes? Tamara looked surprised. Everett never mentioned you were visiting campus. This visit concerns you specifically. 5 minutes of your time. I could hear the caution in Tamara's response. What about your relationship with my grandson? I think we should speak candidly, young woman, to someone who understands how these things work. Tamara hesitated, then nodded. 5 minutes. They walked together toward a quiet alcove near the campus edge, away from the main foot traffic. Dean's team followed at a distance, camera still running. Constance was making this public reckless, desperate, everything she'd never been before. The ancient predator had lost her calculation. Once they were alone in the alcove, Constance's tone changed. I'll be direct, she said. Your pursuit of Everett is an unfortunate mistake. This relationship cannot continue. Tamara's voice went careful. Everett and I care about each other. That's not your decision. You seem like an intelligent girl. Surely you understand that families like ours protect themselves. You come from a modest background. Queens, I believe, raised by a single mother. Art history scholarship. How do you know that I make it my business to know threats to my family? Constance's voice was ice wrapped in silk. Girls from your background who overreach often find themselves disappointed. Scholarship students are particularly vulnerable. Reputation once destroyed never recovers. Through the earpiece feed, I heard Tamara's sharp intake of breath. Then rustling, she was moving something in her pocket. Her phone, I realized. She was recording this. Are you threatening me, Mrs. Prescott? I'm offering you wisdom. Young women face dangers in this city. Columbia has had tragic incidents before accidents stress the pressures of academic life, overwhelming fragile students. Through Dean's earpiece feed, I listened to my mother threaten my daughter's life, and the ancient woman had no idea she was signing her own arrest warrant. I'm not fragile, Tamara said, and I'm not leaving Everett because you think I'm not good enough for your family. Constance's composure cracked. I heard it in her voice, the control-slipping desperation pushing through decades of practiced civility. You don't understand what you're dealing with, she said, voice dropping low. I have resources. I have people who handle problems. Girls like you disappear every day in Manhattan. Runaways, suicides, accidents that no one questions too closely. You're threatening to kill me. Tamara's voice shook but held steady. Because I'm dating your grandson. Then I heard it, the sound of Constance's hand gripping fabric, Tamara's small gasp. Accidents happen to girls like you. Constance said close enough that the phone mic picked up every word crystal clear. Columbia has had tragic incidents before. A fall from a dorm window, accidental drowning in the Hudson, a mugging gone wrong in Morningside Park. This city is dangerous for vulnerable young women who make poor choices. Let go of me. I'm simply observing that young women in your position should be very, very careful. I have people who specialize in unfortunate incidents. They're quite good at making things look natural. Walk away from Everett or you'll discover exactly how dangerous Manhattan can be. Accidents happen to girls like you. She said it, out loud, on a Columbia University campus. And Tamara's phone recorded every word. Tamara pulled away. I'm not going anywhere, and I'm not afraid of you. Constance's laugh was bitter. Then, you're more foolish than I thought. Remember this conversation, Miss Upshaw. Remember that I gave you a chance to do this the easy way. Footsteps, Constance walking away. Through the video feed, I watched my mother leave campus, her back straight. Her step measured, completely unaware that she'd just committed felony criminal threat in front of surveillance teams and a recording device. Dean's voice came through the earpiece. She's clear of campus. Our teams have the encounter documented from 3 angles, audio and video. My phone rang, unknown number. I answered. Hello, a young woman's voice shaking. I found this number in Everett's contacts under Dad Direct Line. A woman just threatened to kill me. She said she was Everett's grandmother. She said, Tamara, I said quietly. I know, I heard everything. How did you Send me the recording from your phone, right now, and stay exactly where you are. You have protection you don't know about. Dean Wolf's surveillance team has been watching you since December 7th. Silence. Then, who are you? Why are you protecting me? Because you're my daughter, I said. And because that woman who just threatened you is going to prison. Tamara called me 30 seconds after Constance left, voice shaking. A woman just threatened to kill me. She said she was Everett's grandmother. I closed my eyes, feeling the trap snap shut. Ace, send me the recording, I said. And stay exactly where you are. You have protection you don't know about. My mother had just handed me the final piece of evidence I needed, delivered in her own voice, time-stamped and geolocated on a college campus with security cameras everywhere. The endgame had begun. The text from Everett arrived at 9:23 a.m. I know what my grandmother did to Tamara. We need to talk, Dad. And I realized my son had finally seen through the lies, but for all the wrong reasons. Tamara had sent me the recording within minutes of our phone call yesterday. Constance's voice crystal clear, making explicit death threats on a college campus. Then she'd asked the question I'd been dreading. Why did you say I'm your daughter? I'd told her we would talk soon, that she was safe, that everything would be explained. But I hadn't expected Everett to learn about the campus confrontation so quickly. He called at 9:30. Tamara told me, he said, without preamble. Grandmother cornered her at Columbia, threatened her, said accidents happen to girls like her. I know, I said carefully. When did she tell you? Last night. She was terrified. She sent me the recording. His voice was tight with fury. I've been up all night connecting everything. The study abroad coercion, Mom's social warfare campaign, grandmother's marriage demands. This wasn't about protecting me. It was about destroying anyone who threatened their control. My son had seen the pattern. He'd assembled the evidence, recognized the systematic manipulation. He just didn't know the real reason behind it. What are you going to do? I asked. I'm meeting Tamara this afternoon. We need to decide if we're strong enough to fight my family or if loving each other means letting go. The decision I'd been hoping to prevent. Everett, there's more to this than you. I know there's more. I know grandmother is capable of actual violence. I know they'll never stop trying to separate us. That's what we need to talk about. He hung up before I could say anything else. Dean called 10 minutes later. Your son just texted Tamara requesting a meeting at the coffee shop near campus, 2 p.m. Should we intervene? No, I said. Let them talk, but keep surveillance close. The assassin is still out there. At 2 p.m., I watched through Dean's remote feed as my children met in a quiet corner of the coffee shop. Everett looked exhausted. Tamara looked haunted. I'm sorry, Everett said immediately. For all of it. My family, the threats, everything you've endured because of me. Tamara showed him her phone. Your grandmother said this. Every word. I couldn't see Everett's face clearly on the feed, but I saw his shoulders tighten as he listened to the recording. Constance's voice cold and precise, describing how accidents happen to vulnerable young women. We need to end this, Everett said when it finished. End what? The relationship or the threats? I won't let them hurt you. I'll walk away from all of it, the money, the family, the inheritance. We can build a life away from them. Tamara's laugh was bitter. And then what? We spend the rest of our lives running, looking over our shoulders. Your grandmother has resources. You heard the recording? She has people who specialize in making problems disappear. Is that love, Everett, or is that selfish? They were making the right decision for entirely the wrong reasons, and I couldn't tell them the truth that would validate their choice while destroying them. And then what do we do? Everett asked. Just give up? I don't know, Tamara said quietly. I love you, but I'm also not stupid enough to think love conquers everything. Your family has been systematically destroying me for weeks. The social isolation, the rumors, the threats, it's not going to stop. And if we stay together, it escalates. So we let them win. We stop letting them use us as weapons against each other. Tamara's voice was stronger now. You accept LSE. You go to London in January. I finish Columbia without a target on my back. We protect each other by letting go. That's not protecting, that's surrendering. Sometimes surrender is the moral choice. Sometimes walking away is the only way to keep the people you love safe. Everett was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was hollow. Is this really what you want? No, but it's what we need to do. They sat in silence, hands almost touching across the table, but not quite making contact. Two 20-year-olds who'd fallen in love without knowing their love was biologically forbidden. Now choosing separation to be ethical about class conflict, they didn't understand was masking something darker. I love you enough to let you go, Everett finally said. Maybe that's what real love means. Tamara's eyes were wet. Maybe someday when we're not pawns in someone else's war, we can find each other again. Do you believe that? I have to. They stood. Everett pulled her into a brief embrace, then stepped back. No kiss, no dramatic farewell. Just two young people choosing what they believed was the right thing, unaware they were making the most ethical decision possible while thinking it was about money and class. My children chose to end their relationship to be moral. If only they knew how moral they were being. Everett called me at 4 p.m. voice hollow with grief. Tamara and I broke up. I'm accepting the LSE program. I'll leave in January. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it for reasons he couldn't understand. Don't be. This is the right decision. Better to end it now than let my family destroy her completely. Everett, there are things you don't know. I know enough. I know my grandmother threatened to kill someone I love. I know my mother orchestrated a social warfare campaign. I know you've been trying to protect me from all of it. That's enough. He hung up. I sat in my office after Everett called to tell me they had ended it, his voice hollow with grief, and I held the truth in my throat like poison. I could tell him now, tell them both why their separation was biologically necessary. Not just socially wise, but the assassin was still active. The trap wasn't complete. And revealing the incest would shatter them before I could guarantee their safety. So I let my son believe he'd made a noble sacrifice when the truth was so much darker than nobility. The final trap had to spring before the truth could land. Dean arrived at the estate at midnight with tactical surveillance equipment, and I had one revelation left that would reframe everything he thought he understood about this case. The mysterious protector wasn't a mystery to me at all. The children had made their choice. Everett to London, Tamara to finish Columbia, alone both believing they'd sacrifice love for morality. I let them make that decision without revealing the biological truth that made their separation essential. But now the clock was ticking toward December 20th, and the assassin Viveka hired was still active, still watching, still waiting for the perfect moment. We met in my private study, the one room without surveillance cameras, the space where I had planned moves my mother would never see coming. Dean spread tactical maps across the desk. Professional killers like Operative 47B wait for moments of concentrated vulnerability, family gatherings, public events, anywhere the target is stationary with plausible chaos for cover. We give him exactly that, stage-controlled with you and me pulling the strings. What kind of event, Don? I asked. Tomorrow night, final transfer of inheritance rights. You Constance Viveka trust attorneys. Big ceremony, formal signing, exactly the kind of ego stroke your mother can't resist attending. We leak it through channels she monitors, make it look like you're finally capitulating completely. Tomorrow is fast. Can we be ready? We can if you're willing to bet everything on one play. Dean pointed at the estate floor plan. Fake signing here in the main boardroom. Real security invisible in these positions. The assassin moves on, what he thinks is an easy target during family chaos. We intercept, capture him alive, connect him to the payment trail. Your mother and wife are finished. And if he doesn't take the bait, if he goes after Tamara at Columbia instead, that's where your secret weapon comes in. Dean pulled up surveillance photos from the past 25 years, the shadow figure appearing seconds before danger. The protector, the one who's been saving Noreen Upshaw for 2.5 decades. It's time you tell me who he is. Because if we're betting Tamara's life tomorrow night, I need to know our backup plan. I walked to the study door and knocked twice. It opened. Harlan Jennings stepped inside, 42 years old, moving through shadows with the lethal professionalism of someone who'd spent 15 years in Secret Service protection. Details before going private. He wore dark tactical clothing, carried himself like a weapon that only fired when necessary, and his eyes scanned the room with automatic threat assessment before settling on Dean. Dean, meet Harlan Jennings, I said. I hired him 25 years ago to keep Noreen Upshaw alive. Dean stood slowly. The mysterious protector. You've been running him this whole time. 5 successful interventions. Harlan said, his voice quiet and controlled. 0 contact with the principal. 25-year retainer paid quarterly through offshore accounts. Mister, Prescott plays very long games. Dean looked at me with something between respect and disbelief. You hired him in 1999, before your mother's first assassination attempt. I hired him the week after Noreen disappeared, I corrected. I couldn't stop my mother directly without revealing I knew about her plans, but I could make sure Noreen survived whatever Constance sent her way. Every near miss, every failed attempt, Harlan was there first. What would Noreen have thought if she'd known that every time death came for her, I was the one sending the guardian angel to turn it away? "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" Dean asked. "Because I needed you to investigate without bias. If you'd known I had protective details running for 25 years, you'd have questioned every finding. This way, you confirmed independently what I already knew. My mother is a serial conspirator, and Harlan is very good at his job." Harlan crossed to the desk and studied the estate floor plan. "Tomorrow night's ceremony. If Operative 47B takes that bait, where do you want him? Sarpst and Alive, I said. "I need him on record connecting payments to targets. Dead assassins can't testify." "And if he moves on the girl at Columbia instead of the estate?" Harlan asked. "Then you do what you've done 5 times before. You stop him, but this time you make contact. You tell Tamara exactly who hired you and why. The truth comes out either way tomorrow night." Dean pulled up the operational timeline. Fake signing ceremony 7 p.m. December 16th. We leak it to Constance through her trust attorney confidential memo about final capitulation. Kenton signing away remaining authority. She and Vivica will attend because they can't resist watching you surrender publicly. "They'll suspect a trap," I said. "Let them suspect. Their assassin is already contracted and activated. If they don't trigger him at the ceremony, he'll move independently on tomorrow before the deadline. Either way, we're positioned." Harlan tapped the Columbia campus map. "I'll maintain close protective detail on the girl from 0600 tomorrow through ceremony time. If 47B makes any approach, I intercept. But I need to know what's my authority if this goes kinetic." "Whatever you need," I said. "Tamara's safety is the only absolute priority." "And the boy Everett? He's leaving for London in 3 weeks. Once the assassin is captured and my mother is arrested, he's safe. But Tamara is the active target." Dean began packing his equipment. "I'll position surveillance van outside the estate by 5 p.m. tomorrow. Cameras covering every entrance audio in the boardroom. Backup team ready to move on your signal. The moment the assassin shows intent, we document everything and call in law enforcement with the evidence package already compiled." "Wait, what about my mother's response when she realizes it's a trap?" I asked. "By the time she realizes," Dean said, "the morality clause will already be activated assets frozen, and federal prosecutors will have 25 years of documented conspiracy. There's no response that saves her. Tomorrow night, 24 hours. Everything I'd built for 25 years would either save my children or collapse into ruins." We synchronized watches. Harlan would shadow Tamara starting at dawn. Dean would establish surveillance nest by late afternoon. I would perform my final act of defeated heir, sitting at my mother's table, signing documents that meant nothing, while the real power played out in shadows and surveillance feeds. Dean packed his surveillance equipment. Harlan disappeared into the night to shadow Tamara's dorm, and I stood alone in the study where my mother had ruled for decades. Tomorrow evening, I would sit at that same table and pretend to sign away my power while assassins, investigators, and family converged for the final confrontation. The trap was perfect. But perfect traps still require someone to walk into them. And I still didn't know if my mother was desperate enough to pull the trigger with 1 day left. The attack came at 7:14 p.m., exactly 43 minutes into the signing ceremony, when 2 men in catering uniforms moved toward Tamara with practiced efficiency, and I knew the trap I'd built using my own daughter as bait had just sprung shut. She was desperate enough. My mother was desperate enough to pull the trigger. The Prescott Estate main hall glittered with crystal and old money pretense. 30 guests gathered to witness what they believed was my final capitulation. Constance sat at the head, wearing victory like her pearls. Viveka stood beside her, already spending the penthouse proceeds. I'd invited Tamara as a goodwill gesture. She'd agreed reluctantly, not knowing she was the most protected person in the room and simultaneously the bait. The signing progressed as scripted. I read terms of surrender, each clause transferring authority to my mother. Harrison witnessed signatures. Constance smiled. Then 2 men in white catering jackets broke from the service staff. They moved with professional precision toward Tamara, positioned exactly where I'd placed her near the east windows. Dean's voice in my earpiece, subjects approaching target, ETA 8 seconds. The first attacker reached her. "Miss Upshaw, your car is waiting outside. Family emergency." Harlan Jennings emerged from the alcove I'd positioned him in, 3 seconds from approach to interception. "On hands where I can see them," Harlan said quietly. "Don't move." The second attacker's hand came out holding a syringe. "Sedative. Quick injection, carry her out." Dispose of body, later collect payment. Harlan disabled him in 2 moves. The first attacker tried to run. Harlan had him face down on marble within 5 seconds. Guests screamed. Constance stood. Vivica went pale. I pulled my phone and executed the programmed sequence. First call, trust attorney's emergency line. Execute morality clause authorization. Domestic violence conspiracy confirmed. Freeze all trust assets immediately. 90 seconds. That's how long it took Harrison to trigger the legal mechanism my grandfather built in 1952. $180 million frozen pending investigation. I had used my daughter, my own daughter, who didn't even know I was her father, as bait to catch the people trying to kill her. Second call, Detective Lieutenant Marcus Gray, 48. A veteran investigator I'd briefed over 3 days, positioned 2 blocks away with pre-approved warrants. Detective, this is Kenton Prescott. The attempt just occurred. You can move in now. Constance walked toward me, face transformed from triumph to rage. This was a setup. You staged all of this. I staged a ceremony, I said. You staged an assassination attempt. The difference matters in court. You have no proof? Dean emerged carrying a tablet with split-screen footage. 3 angles. December 6th, your voice planning the hit. December 13th, threatening Miss Upshaw at Columbia. Tonight, your hired killers. Every word time-stamped. Viveka tried to leave. Harlan blocked the exit. The money came from your gallery accounts, I told her. $12 million wired to Meridian Strategic Solutions. Dean has the complete trail. Sirens outside, 4 minutes from call to arrival. Detective Gray entered with 8 officers carrying the weight of legal authority I'd spent weeks building. He read charges with methodical precision. Constance Prescott Viveka. Prescott, you're both under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, attempted kidnapping, and conspiracy to commit assault. You have the right to remain silent. This is insane, Viveka said. We had nothing to do with... I have recordings of you planning it, I interrupted. Your voice, your words, your payment. The 1999 contract with your signature mother, surveillance footage, wire transfers, every detail documented and verified. Gray held up evidence folders Dean prepared. Audio recordings, video surveillance, financial forensics, and 2 suspects already negotiating cooperation. Most documented conspiracy case I've worked in 20 years. Handcuffs clicked onto my mother's wrists. The Empress had fallen. Constance's face, imperious for 80 years, cracked into cold recognition that she'd been outplayed by the son she'd underestimated for 5 decades. You did this? She said. You orchestrated everything. I protected my children, I said. You tried to kill them. We're not the same. Viveka was crying mascara, running the elegant gallery owner, reduced to someone who'd gambled on murder and lost. 30 witnesses stood frozen. Some recorded on phones. Others simply stared at the wreckage. The trust was frozen. The assassins were in custody. My mother and wife were being arrested in front of everyone who mattered in Manhattan's financial elite. But Tamara stood near the windows, staring at me with questions I couldn't answer. Why had I positioned her there? Why had I brought her to this house? And Everett would arrive within the hour to find his grandmother arrested and his family imploded. They led my mother and my wife away in handcuffs, while 30 witnesses stood frozen in the wreckage of what was supposed to be my defeat. The $180 million trust was frozen. The assassins were in custody, and every crime was documented with timestamps and signatures. But Tamara stood near the window, staring at me with questions I still couldn't answer. And Everett would arrive home from his dorm within the hour to find his grandmother arrested and his family imploded. The trap had worked perfectly. Now came the part where I had to tell my children why. The truth about blood and biology was all that remained. The Prescott Holdings boardroom had witnessed 8 decades of power transfers, but nothing like this. 30 family members filled the leather chairs, board, members, cousins, executives who'd built careers on Mother's foundation. The December morning light cut through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating faces that ranged from curious to hostile. I stood at the head of the mahogany table, where my grandfather had announced the trust's creation in 1952. Dean Fletcher stood beside me, a laptop open, 3 banker's boxes stacked at his feet. Thank you for coming on short notice, I said. Yesterday, Constance Prescott and Viveka Ashford were arrested for conspiracy to commit murder. Today you'll understand why. Edmund Prescott, Mother's younger brother, 81 years old, sat rigid in his chair. Kenton, this is unconscionable. Your own mother... Watch. Dean pressed a key. The projection screen flickered to life. Mother's voice filled the room. The trust reverts to me the moment Kenton dies. Make it look natural. Viveka's response was clinical. The Meridian operative specializes in accidents. 12 million offshore transfer. I watched their faces. Shock rippled through the room like a physical wave. My cousin Helena pressed a hand to her mouth. Marcus Ashford, Viveka's nephew, pushed back from the table, as if distance could erase what he'd heard. This conversation took place November 30th, Dean said. In the surveillance room, Kenton discovered in his own home. The equipment had been installed for 25 years. He clicked through images, the hidden camera array, the Bronx storage facility, the 1999 contract, with Mother's signature hiring assassins to eliminate Noreen Castellano. Financial records showing 5 previous murder attempts, each funded through shell corporations Viveka controlled. 5 times, I said quietly. 5 times my mother tried to have my son's girlfriend killed. Because 25 years ago, that woman witnessed something Mother wanted erased. The surveillance footage continued. Mother and Viveka, reviewing Dean's background check, discussing how to coerce Everett into signing the LSE's e-transfer, calculating the 72-hour window they needed. How do you watch your mother orchestrate your death and feel nothing? I'd asked myself that question for 17 days. The answer wasn't numbness, it was something harder. Clarity. The morality clause, Edmund said suddenly. His voice had changed, gone flat. You're invoking the 1952 provision. I am. I pulled the document from my briefcase. 72 years old, the pages slightly yellowed, but the language crystalline. My grandfather understood that wealth without accountability breeds corruption. He built a safeguard. I read the key passage aloud. Should any heir or trustee engage in acts of domestic violence, conspiracy to murder, or criminal enterprise utilizing trust resources, said assets shall be immediately frozen and subjected to judicial review. The accused shall be stripped of all fiduciary authority pending criminal adjudication. Effective yesterday at 1947, I continued. Constance Prescott's access to the $180 million charitable trust has been terminated. Her board seat signing authority and beneficial interest are suspended indefinitely. The trust will be restructured under independent oversight. Silence. Then Helena spoke, her voice shaking. Kenton, we need to know, is Everett safe? He's under 24-hour protection. The immediate threat has been neutralized. I met her eyes. But he needs more than security. He needs this family to stand with him against what Mother built. Marcus cleared his throat. I move that we formally support Kenton's actions and offer complete cooperation with law enforcement. Seconded, Helena said immediately. The vote was unanimous. Edmund rose, slowly gripping the table edge. At 81, he rarely attended board meetings anymore, but he'd come today. Now, I understood why. I need to say something. His voice carried the weight of decades. About Constance, about who she's always been. The room held its breath. Our father, your grandfather Kenton, died in 1964. Heart attack, the death certificate said. He was 58 years old, healthy as an ox. Edmund's hands trembled. Constance was 33. She'd just been passed over for the CFO position in favor of a male colleague. I was in the house that night. I saw her come out of his study. She was calm, too calm. He was dead within an hour. Edmund, Helena whispered. I was 20, terrified, and she was my sister. I kept quiet. His eyes met mine. But I've watched her for 60 years. The pattern never changed. Anyone who threatened her control simply disappeared from her path. I should have spoken up decades ago. I'm sorry, Kenton. I'm so damn sorry. The confession hung in the air like smoke. Mother hadn't just planned my death, and Noreen, she'd been doing this for 6 decades. The woman who'd raised me was a serial orchestrator of elimination. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I shouldn't have checked it, not in the middle of the most important board meeting in Prescott history, but something made me glance at the screen. Everett, Dad. Tamara needs to talk to you. Today. She says it's about why her mom left NYC in 1999. She's ready to tell me everything, but she wants you there when she does. The message, time-stamped 10:47 a.m., glowed like a warning flare. I stood before the wreckage of my mother's 80-year empire, her brother's confession still echoing off mahogany panels, 30 family members waiting for me to lead them forward. We'd neutralized the conspiracy, frozen, the assets proven the pattern of violence that stretched back to my grandfather's suspicious death. But my son's message glowed on my screen like a countdown timer. Tamara knows something, and she's ready to tell him. I was drafting my response to Everett when my phone rang at 6 in the morning. The screen displayed a number I didn't recognize, Washington, D.C. area code. Mr. Prescott, this is Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Richards. Her voice was professionally neutral. Your mother suffered a massive stroke in federal custody at 5:47 this morning. She's been transferred to Bellevue Hospital Intensive Care Unit under guard. Prognosis is uncertain. The words registered without impact. Mother, stroke, uncertain. I should have felt something alarm grief, the instinct to rush to her bedside. Instead, I felt only the same hollow exhaustion that had settled over me since discovering the surveillance room. I understand, I said. Her attorney insists you receive this immediately. Richards paused. A courier is en route to your residence with a sealed envelope. Your mother's instructions specify it should only be opened if she became incapacitated. He'll arrive within the hour. The envelope came at 7:30. Heavy cream stationery, my mother's monogram embossed in navy. Inside 6 pages in her distinctive cursive dated November 27th, 3 weeks ago, before Everett ever mentioned Tamara's name. I carried it to my study and read, Kenton, if you are reading this, I am unable to speak for myself. What follows is the truth I could never voice while conscious. In 1990, I separated you from an unsuitable attachment. The girl from Queens, pleasant enough I'm sure, but wholly inappropriate for a Prescott heir. Her family had nothing, no education. No refinement, no understanding of the responsibilities our name carries. I saw the infatuation consuming you, derailing the trajectory I'd spent 20 years constructing. I paid her family, not an enormous sum, but sufficient to relocate and ensure she understood the gap between her world and ours. I told you she'd taken the money willingly, that she'd never truly cared. I let you believe love had betrayed you because that pain would pass faster than the fantasy of building a life with someone fundamentally incompatible with your future. I protected our family the only way I knew. If I was too severe, history will judge whether I was wrong. I set the first page down carefully. She destroyed my life over social embarrassment. She never even knew about Tamara. The second section detailed Viveka's role with calculated precision. Viveka exceeded my instructions. I asked her to monitor the situation to ensure the separation remained permanent. The violence was never my intent, only the preservation of appropriate boundaries. The contracts you discovered, the assassination attempts, these were her extremism, not my directive. She took protective measures I would never have authorized and used family resources without my knowledge. I accept responsibility for creating the circumstances that allowed her actions, but the blood is not on my hands. No apology, I said to the empty room. No recognition, just more manipulation from a hospital bed. My mother's handwriting looked exactly like it did on childhood report cards. Birthday cards she signed, but never wrote trust documents that controlled my entire life. Elegant, controlled, completely devoid of warmth. Even facing mortality, even stripped of all power, she couldn't write the word sorry. The final page included a postscript that reframed everything. You should know your father had an affair in 1973. It produced a child your half-sister raised in Philadelphia, under her mother's name. I discovered it in 1975 when the woman demanded money. I paid for silence and raised you alone while he traveled for business, pretending our marriage was intact. When I saw you with that girl in 1990, I saw him. The same recklessness, the same romantic delusion that passion justifies abandoning duty. I swore I would protect you from his weakness. Even if you hated me for it, perhaps especially if you hated me for it. My methods were harsh because I understood where softness leads. If I controlled too much, it was because I had been controlled too little and the cost was unbearable. I remain as always your mother. No signature, just those 5 words as if maternity alone justified 6 decades of manipulation. I stood at the window staring across the East River. Through the penthouse glass, I could see Queens, the borough, where Noreen raised our daughter alone. Where Tamara grew up, watching an empire she could see from her bedroom window but never touch. Mother's letter sat on my desk, like evidence of everything neither of them knew. That Constance's cruelty was born from her own betrayal, that she'd destroyed my chance at family because my father had destroyed hers. It didn't excuse anything. Understanding pathology doesn't erase its consequences. My phone rang at 8 that evening, Noreen's name on the screen. Tamara wants to meet you, she said without preamble. Privately, before she talks to Everett. When? Tomorrow morning, neutral location, there's a coffee shop near Columbia she likes. 10 o'clock. Noreen's voice carried warning. She's been reading about the trust structure Kenton. She wants direct answers about her biological father before making decisions. The implications settled like weight. She's researching inheritance law. She's smart. She deserves to understand her position before choosing what to do with information that will change everything. A pause. She wants to hear your side directly. She deserves that conversation before she decides what to tell Everett. I'll be there, I said. Tell her I'll answer every question honestly. That's what I'm afraid of. Noreen hung up. I had 24 hours to prepare for meeting my daughter for the first time as her father. Constance's letter sat on my desk like evidence of everything I'd lost, the relationship she'd destroyed, the child I'd never known, the decades of isolation she'd engineered from her own unhealed wound. And Noreen's warning echoed, Tamara knows about the trust structure. Tomorrow I would face the child I never knew existed, and she would be looking at me not just as the stranger who shares her DNA, but as the man who controls wealth that could have changed her entire life. The meeting with Tamara had happened at a small coffee shop near Columbia the previous morning. She'd looked at me with Noreen's eyes and asked questions I couldn't answer. Now, 24 hours later, I sat in a secure viewing room at the Manhattan Federal Courthouse watching my uncle testify before a grand jury. Edmund Prescott walked into the chamber at 9 o'clock, carrying a banker's box that contained 60 years of insurance, every suspicious document, every unexplained payment, every piece of evidence he'd secretly copied while living in his sister's shadow. Dean sat beside me in the darkened room, the closed-circuit monitor showing Edmund's face in sharp detail. At 81, my uncle looked frail in the witness chair, but his voice was steady. "State your name for the record," the prosecutor said. "Edmund Charles Prescott. I'm Constance Prescott's younger brother. Mr. Prescott, you've brought materials to share with this jury. Please explain." Edmund opened the box with careful hands. "I knew eventually someone would need proof that my sister was capable of anything. I started collecting evidence in 1964, the night our father died. The prosecutor, Sarah Richards, the same woman who'd called about Mother's stroke, guided him through it methodically. Edmund produced the original coroner's report from 1964, highlighting symptoms inconsistent with cardiac arrest, hospital records showing Constance visiting their father's room alone at 11 p.m., a will modification dated 3 days after the death. All beneficiaries changed in Constance's favor. "How many incidents have you documented over 60 years?" Richards asked. 7 deaths or serious injuries, all convenient for my sister. Edmund's voice broke slightly. All people who threatened her control or knew things she wanted buried. He walked through them one by one. A business partner who discovered financial irregularities in 1972 died in a skiing accident. A family attorney who questioned trust modifications in 1985 fatal car crash. A board member who opposed her consolidation of power in 1998 unexplained stroke. "The pattern is consistent," Edmund said. "Offshore payments to physicians, lawyers, fixers, threats delivered through intermediaries. I documented everything because I was terrified. And fear makes you meticulous." Richards presented financial records cross-referenced with Edmund's copies, shell corporations funding accidents, medical examiners receiving sudden deposits, witnesses who recanted statements after receiving unexplained windfalls. "Mr. Prescott, are you aware of additional victims willing to testify? I am. 2 individuals are alive and prepared to describe how Constance threatened their families if they didn't cooperate with false narratives. We're building a RICO case, treating her entire operation as a criminal enterprise spanning decades, not just the recent assassination conspiracy." The words landed like stones. My mother wasn't facing prosecution for one crime, but for a lifetime methodology of elimination. Edmund's banker's box sat on the prosecution table. Now 60 years of fear, converted into exhibits, my uncle was braver than I'd ever be, documenting horror while pretending respect, living in his sister's house while building the case that would bury her. Dean's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then passed it to me, silently. The notification detailed Viveka's plea agreement, guilty to conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction. Recommended sentence 8 to 12 years. In exchange, full cooperation and testimony against Constance. Her attorney had released a statement. I read it twice, feeling the familiar hollow anger. Ms. Viveka Prescott was manipulated by her mother-in-law's controlling influence over family finances and dynamics. She deeply regrets her involvement and accepts responsibility while acknowledging the coercive environment in which these decisions were made. "She's still playing victim," I said to Dean. "Still deflecting, even in a guilty plea." "The prosecutor doesn't care about narrative," Dean replied. "She cares about testimony. Combined with Edmund's evidence, they have an overwhelming case. My phone rang, Sarah Richards calling from a different line. "Your mother will never see freedom again," she said without preamble. "If she recovers sufficiently to stand trial, we're seeking 25 to life. At 93, that's a death sentence. If she doesn't recover, she'll spend her remaining time in medical custody." "I understand. Your uncle's testimony was remarkably brave. I wanted you to know that." I thanked her and ended the call. The legal machinery was complete. Mother would die, imprisoned or incapacitated. Viveka would serve nearly a decade. Edmund's silence had finally broken. I had won every public fight. But the private conversation waiting required different courage. That evening in my penthouse, I replayed the meeting with Tamara in my mind. She'd arrived precisely on time, ordered black coffee, and looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. She had Noreen's bone structure and dark eyes, but when she tilted her head, processing information, I saw myself at 20. The same analytical pause, the same habit of touching her temple when thinking. "Why didn't you search for her?" she'd asked. Direct, no preamble. I believed she'd taken money and left. I was 21, devastated and completely manipulated. "I'm not asking you to forgive, that I'm telling you the truth." "I researched the trust structure," she'd said. "I understand what my existence means legally. I want you to know I'm not here for money." "What are you here for?" "Acknowledgement. And I want my brother to hear the truth from people who won't lie to protect him." Tamara had Noreen's directness and my methodology, 20 years of genetics expressing in a stranger who should have been my daughter, but was raised by better men than I'd proven to be. I called Noreen that evening. Tamara agreed to participate in telling Everett. I said, "I'm proposing we do it together, you, me, both children. Controlled revelation with support present." Noreen was quiet for a long moment. "She has one condition. Harlan must be there." "Harlan." "He's her father, Kenton. Not biologically, but in every way that matters. She won't participate in any narrative that excludes the man who was actually present for 20 years. If you want her cooperation, you accept that he earned the title you never got to use." "I understand," I said quietly. "Fatherhood is presence, not DNA. He deserves that recognition." The legal battle was over. Constance would die in prison or a hospital bed. Vivica had traded loyalty for leniency. Edmund's silence had finally ended. I had won every public fight. But the private conversation waiting required sitting across from my son, my daughter, the woman I should have married, and the man who became the father. I never got to be explaining how my mother's cruelty created a family that biology connected, but secrecy destroyed. We met in a neutral space, not my penthouse, not Noreen's home, just a rented conference room in Midtown, with no Prescott history and no family ghosts, because some truths require neutral ground. 5 people sat around a table designed for corporate negotiations. Everett arrived first, tense and confused. Tamara came with Noreen and Harlan, her hand briefly touching Harlan's arm before she took her seat. I was the last to enter, carrying the weight of 25 years of silence. "Thank you all for coming," I began. My voice was steadier than I expected. "What we're about to discuss will be difficult, but you both deserve complete honesty." Everett looked at Tamara across the table. They sat on opposite sides, maintaining careful distance, not avoiding eyes, but not holding contact either. "In 1989, I met Noreen," I said. "I was a 20-year-old Columbia student. She was brilliant, funny, real in a way no one in my world had ever been. We fell in love." Noreen picked up the thread without prompting. "Your grandmother discovered the relationship in April 1990. She considered me unsuitable, wrong background, wrong family, wrong everything. She orchestrated my removal." "How?" Everett asked quietly. "Money and threats," I said. "She paid Noreen's family to relocate. She told me Noreen had taken the money willingly, that the relationship meant nothing." I was 21, devastated, and I believed her. I never searched because I thought I'd been betrayed. The conference room was silent except for the hum of ventilation. Tamara's expression was carefully neutral, but her fingers were pressed flat against the table. "I was pregnant when I left," Noreen said. "I didn't tell anyone because Constance had already proven she would destroy anyone in her path. Hiding the pregnancy wasn't punishment. It was protection. For my child." Everett absorbed this methodically, his face unreadable. "So, grandmother separated you, and you raised Tamara alone." "Harlan and I raised her," Noreen corrected gently. "He's been her father in every way that matters." Harlan spoke for the first time, his voice calm and certain. "I've had the privilege of being Tamara's dad for 20 years. What we're here to clarify doesn't change that." I took a breath. The next words would change everything. "Everett, Tamara is my biological daughter, which makes her your half-sister. The relationship you developed was between siblings. The silence was absolute. Tamara and Everett sat motionless, learning to be siblings instead of whatever they'd been becoming. Neither moved, neither spoke. Everett's voice when it came was hollow. Did Tamara know? I suspected after the library discovery, Tamara said honestly. The timeline, the way your grandmother reacted, but I ended the relationship anyway because something felt wrong. I just didn't have proof. Why didn't you tell me immediately? Everett looked directly at me. When you figured it out, why wait? Because Constance still controlled everything, I said. If I'd revealed the truth before dismantling her power, she would have used it as a weapon. Against you, against Tamara, against all of us. I needed to ensure the truth wouldn't endanger either of you. Did grandmother know? Everett's question was razor sharp. About the incest risk? No. The answer was simple and damning. She destroyed our relationship over class prejudice without knowing Noreen was pregnant. She never calculated the consequences of her cruelty. She exercised power without understanding its devastation. Everett's response was barely audible. She destroyed everyone for nothing. My hands were steady as I explained the biology, the timeline, the legal protections I'd already arranged. But my chest felt compressed, like breathing through cloth. This was fatherhood. Telling truth that hurt, because lies would hurt worse. I want to be clear, I continued. This situation was created by adult failures. Mine for not searching, Noreen's for circumstances that made hiding necessary, Constance's for cruelty that set everything in motion. You two bear no responsibility for being drawn to each other. Biology doesn't announce itself. Tamara spoke carefully. What happens now? That depends on what you both need, Noreen said. We're not here to dictate terms. We're here to give you truth and support whatever decisions you make. Harlan leaned forward slightly. Everett, I want you to know I'm grateful Tamara will finally have answers about her biological father. Family isn't diminished by truth, it's just redefined. I've been her dad for 20 years. Biology doesn't threaten that. It just gives her the complete picture she deserves. I don't want to disrupt your life, Tamara said to Everett. I just needed the truth. What you do with it is your choice. Everett looked at her for a long moment. I need time to process, but I don't blame you, either of you. I outlined the path forward. Biological relationship stays. Private, Tamara gets acknowledgement and access to medical history. Everett gets honesty and space to heal. Legal documents would protect everyone's interests. Public narrative remains unchanged. Private reality gets honored. We can navigate this, I said. It won't be easy, but it's possible. Tamara's voice was quiet. I'm grateful we never went beyond kissing. Everett's response surprised everyone. I pushed for boundaries. I told you I wanted to wait and I meant it, but I didn't understand why. Gut instinct told me to be careful. Like some part of me knew. They looked at each other across the table. Two people who'd fallen in love, discovering they were family. Realizing they had unconsciously protected themselves from crossing lines that would have made this revelation traumatic instead of painful. That instinct may have saved you both, Noreen said softly. We sat in that conference room for 3 hours. 5 people rebuilding family from confession and biology and brutal honesty. When Everett and Tamara left separately, agreements made to process independently before considering future contact, I understood that truth had been delivered, but healing would take years. The incest crisis was resolved through disclosure, not denial. And now the harder question remained, what kind of father do you become when acknowledgement comes 20 years late? 9 days after the truth revelation, I invited Tamara to the Prescott Holdings boardroom. The space where my mother once dictated terms to terrified executives now held just 2 people. A 55-year-old CEO learning what acknowledgement looks like, and the 20-year-old daughter he was meeting for the second time, with legal documents that prove fatherhood doesn't require announcement. My estate attorney Gerald Brennan, a precise man in his 60s who'd handled Prescott family matters for 30 years, sat at the table with 3 bound folders. Ms. Upshaw. He began formally, these documents establish an irrevocable private trust on your behalf. $200,000 for educational expenses, lifetime comprehensive medical coverage, and a $2.5 million principal generating ongoing income through conservative investment. Tamara reviewed each page carefully. She had my habit of tilting her head when processing complex information, the same analytical pause I used in board meetings. This is structured as acknowledgement of personal responsibility. She said, reading the language precisely. No paternity designation, no family tree placement, no shareholder status. Correct, Brennan confirmed. It's private acknowledgement without public declaration. You receive full control at age 25. The terms are irrevocable regardless of future circumstances. Who knows about this? Only the 3 people in this room and the trustee bank bound by confidentiality, I said. It's not buying silence tomorrow. It's 20 years of child support I should have provided if I'd known you existed. She looked at me directly. I need to be certain you understand I had Harlan. I survived without Prescott money. This doesn't change that. I know. That's exactly why you deserve it. She signed with careful precision. Her signature, nothing like mine, she wrote the way Noreen did, small and controlled. Brennan witnessed, collected the documents, and excused himself with professional discretion. The boardroom fell silent after he left. Just the 2 of us and the city visible through floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan spreading in every direction. Queens across the East River, where she'd grown up, watching this empire from a distance. Tamara spoke first. I'm not angry at you. I want you to know that. The words landed unexpectedly. I'm angry at your mother, she continued, for creating conditions that forced my mom to hide, for exercising power without calculating human cost. But you were 21 and terrified. I understand that. What would I have done differently if I'd known? I said quietly. I've asked myself that question 1,000 times. I would have fought for Noreen, rejected the control, chosen love over legacy. But you didn't know. Her voice was matter-of-fact pragmatic in a way that reminded me achingly of myself. So, we both deal with what actually happened, not what should have been. Tamara had Noreen's cheekbones and dark eyes, but she drummed her fingers when thinking exactly the way I did, a stranger carrying pieces of me, raised by people who loved her more completely than I could have at 21 and broken. Harlan is my father, she said. Not biologically, but in every way that counts. I'm not looking to replace that relationship. I just wanted to know where I came from. I can't undo 20 years, I replied. I can't claim fatherhood I didn't earn through presence. But if you ever need anything medical, history, legal advice, just someone who understands the biology, I want you to have access. I appreciate that. She paused. Can I ask what you're doing with the company, now that your mother's gone? Restructuring, independent oversight, actual accountability instead of dynasty theater. Will Everett take over eventually? Only if he wants to, not because he's obligated. I met her eyes. I'm trying to break the pattern of control my mother perfected. Tamara smiled slightly. I'm applying to Columbia Law School for fall 2025. I wanted you to know before you heard it elsewhere. The revelation settled like sunlight. Columbia, where I'd attended via legacy admission and family connections. Where she would earn her way through merit scores and personal statements. No Prescott advantage requested or offered. That's remarkable, I said honestly. You'll be extraordinary there. I hope so. It's where my parents met technically. Full circle. The boardroom door stood open behind us, mahogany installed in 1952, when my grandfather built this headquarters, closed behind 3 generations of Prescott decisions. I was preparing to close it behind truth instead of control, and the difference mattered. Would you like to see the view from my office? I offered. The whole city, including Queens, where you grew up. Tamara considered, then shook her head gently. Maybe someday, but not yet. I'm still processing what it means this was always here while I was across the river. I understand. We walked to the boardroom exit together. At the threshold, she turned back. Thank you, she said. Not for the money, for the honesty. That's what I actually needed. You deserved both. We shook hands, formally acknowledging reality, without pretending it was more than it could be. She left through the executive corridor, her footsteps fading toward the elevators. I stood alone in the empty boardroom. The wall where former board chairs' nameplates hung in chronological order showed a conspicuous gap maintenance had already removed my mother's brass rectangle. They hadn't waited for ceremony or formal decision, just erased her. 80 years of power, reduced to a missing nameplate and an empty chair I would leave unfilled. I walked to the doorway and looked back one final time, the table where Constance had orchestrated separations and hired assassins. The windows overlooking the city she'd controlled through fear. The walls that had witnessed her cruelty disguised as protection. I closed the door carefully, locked it, walked toward the elevators, understanding that family is defined by courage to tell truth and grace to let people choose their response. I walked out of Prescott Holdings on December 24th, 2024, leaving behind the empire my mother built and the daughter I acknowledged but couldn't claim. The revenge was complete justice delivered in courtrooms and conference rooms, Constance imprisoned by her own methodology, Vivica, trading loyalty for leniency. But the real ending wasn't about victory. It was standing in that boardroom choosing honesty over image, accepting that some relationships exist in private acknowledgement rather than public declaration. Understanding the family I destroyed and rebuilt would never look like the one I was born into. Constance's legacy was fear, mine would be truth, and in that difference lay whatever redemption remained possible. And to you listening to my story, remember this: power built on secrets always collapses, but truth spoken with courage can rebuild what seemed destroyed forever. Don't make my mistake. I spent 25 years believing a lie because it was easier than questioning the person who controlled my world. I let my mother define love, family, and worth for me. I never searched for Noreen because I was afraid of the truth. That fear cost me decades with a daughter I should have known and almost destroyed my son's life. This family betrayal taught me something essential. Loyalty to truth matters more than loyalty to power. When you discover family betrayal, whether it's manipulation, lies, or control disguised as love, you have a choice. You can perpetuate the pattern or break it with honesty. Every family story contains both inheritance and choice. We inherit circumstances, but we choose what to do with them. I believe God gives us chances to correct the mistakes of previous generations. My mother chose control. I'm choosing truth. That difference defines everything. If this family story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever faced family betrayal or discovered hidden truths that changed everything? Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more stories about truth, redemption, and family, please subscribe and join this community. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your time means everything to me. One final note: while this family story is inspired by real experiences, certain details have been adjusted for privacy and storytelling. What I hope stays with you is the message about choosing truth over control.